When the man participated in his family's awakening ceremony for the first time, he stunned the sister known as the Sword Saint on the spot, because this direct descendant, deemed by the family to be the most worthless in history, at this very moment perfectly replicated the absolute power of the strongest ancestor of the noble house. But not long before this, he had only been an ordinary medic. The power of curses was eroding the world at every moment, and any human unable to withstand that erosion would eventually fall completely and become a mindless monster. To fight these rampant undead creatures, heroes gathered together and formed an organization called Azure Generation. And Crash's duty was to strip away the curses that the organization's leader, Arthur, accidentally picked up in battle whenever necessary. At this moment, a surge of purple energy exploded violently from Crash's body. This was the trump card of the abandoned son of the Valheim family, and also the theft skill despised by his entire clan. The instant the curse was forcibly stripped away, Crash's body bent sharply, and black blood gushed uncontrollably from his mouth. Although Blackhood could steal away curses, while activating it, he would suffer an extremely severe backlash. On the battlefield not far away, a Death Knight brandished a pitch-black giant scythe. That nearly apocalyptic pressure was so overwhelming that no one could breathe properly. With just this many people, you want to stand against the Death Knight? How ridiculous. Before the words had even finished, the longsword in Arthur's hand crashed to the ground. Hearing the sound, the three women immediately rushed over and held Arthur tightly. Seeing this, Crash let out two dry laughs. As the leader of Azure Generation, did this bastard really know what he was doing? Arthur's indifferent voice slowly rang out. This is the end. The world's hope was cut off long ago. Everything we've done has been futile. Those words made Crash suddenly raise his head. Give up? Arthur, how dare you say something like that? Do you know how many people died without even leaving whole bodies just to get you here? Everyone is hanging on with their last breath, and all you can think about is holding women in your arms. Shut up, you useless young Master Crash. The one speaking was Sigren, the third empress of the Athenia Empire. In her eyes, Arthur had already pushed himself to the limit. Besides, Arthur was the hope of the entire Athenia Empire, while this useless thief had no right to lecture him at all. Crash raised a hand to his forehead in disbelief. The next second, he suddenly burst into wild laughter. That's right, I'm the useless trash abandoned by my family, and the thief you all talk about. But without this piece of trash, you'd all have become piles of rotten flesh on the battlefield long ago. After saying that, he raised the finger engraved with runes and pointed it straight at the women protected behind Arthur. Listen carefully, all of you. Without my stealing, none of you would have made it to the central battlefield at all. Then Crash's gaze locked first onto the red-haired witch Abella, a member of Azure Generation from the Magic Tower, who was looking at Arthur with worried eyes at that moment. Abella, have you forgotten? Once you lose your voice, you can't use magic. Again and again, you begged me to steal the curse away for you. But when I suffered the backlash and had to rely on medicine to suppress it, you attacked me without the slightest hesitation. Next, he looked at Mary Diana, the spear-wielding woman, the most famous sharpshooter in the Athenia Empire. When you were once tormented by the curse until you dropped to your knees crying and begging me to strip it away for you, you didn't wear that cold expression you have now. The curse ruins were still spreading, and Crash forced himself to stand, though his body was already swaying on the verge of collapse. And finally, you, Sigren, the third empress of the Athenia Empire. At the academy, just because I belonged to the faction of the Kingdom of Starin, you targeted me at every turn. But even so, I endured all the humiliation and did everything I could to heal your eyes. Because you were Azure Generation, you were the ones chosen to save the world. And I was just a worthless failure with no talent for combat, a thief you could discard at any moment. After saying that, Crash looked quietly at Arthur, his gaze firm and impossible to shake. But now you want to give up everything. What exactly is it for? I've seen you stand on the front lines no matter what, even while surrounded by people who didn't understand you. That's exactly why I decided to stay by your side. So why is it that at the very end, you're giving up so easily? Arthur slowly raised his head at those words. Just as he had said before, the world had already moved toward its end. What he intended to do was tear everything down and start over. And the reason he had experienced the destruction of the world more than once was because of his talent, Return. Crash's expression froze instantly, and his mind went completely blank. He had never imagined that the so-called savior before him possessed such an almost cheating ability. Arthur's gaze swept over the three women beside him, and this time, he had also gained memory inheritance. Starting over with the experience of the past would give him a greater chance of success, so he intended to set out on a new journey once again with the three of them. Crash's voice trembled slightly. Then what about me? In all of this, what am I supposed to be? Arthur's eyes turned cold in an instant. As for you, you're not necessary to bring back. Those words struck like thunder, shattering Crash's convictions on the spot. Arthur still looked completely relaxed. Crash's Black Hood was indeed useful, capable of easily stealing away powerful curses that could not be removed by other means. But it was precisely because of those curses that Crash's body and soul had both been worn down to the very limit. There was no meaning in returning with a Crash who was exhausted and covered in curses. It was far better to bring back a clean, newly born Crash instead, for greater efficiency. Crash's pupils widened suddenly, and tears finally slid down his cheeks. So from beginning to end, he had only ever been a disposable consumable. This man had never regarded him as a companion who would live and die together with him. Arthur looked down at Crash, the corner of his mouth curving into a cruel arc. There's no need to worry. In the next world, or even the one after that, I'll make good use of you. So say goodbye to this world, Crash, the worthless young master of the Valheim family. In truth, Crash should have understood this long ago. If Arthur had really treated him as a companion, then when the people of Azure Generation ignored and excluded him, Arthur would never have stood by and done nothing. Crash clenched his teeth tightly as a mad obsession surged up from the bottom of his heart. He suddenly remembered that Black Hood seemed able to steal more than just curses. It could work on other people's talent skills as well. It was just that stealing talents was far more difficult than stealing curses, so he had never tried it on Arthur. But now, this was his only chance to survive. The next second, dark energy poured madly into Crash's body like a tidal wave. He revealed a smile so crazed it reached the extreme, and activated his skill, Black Hood. At the same time, Arthur was bathing in a dazzling radiance of return, arms spread wide as he prepared to welcome a new world. Just then, several black shadows surged wildly out from Crash's body, and in an instant they transformed into a gigantic hand that blotted out the sky, carrying a destructive force as it fiercely grabbed down toward Arthur. When he opened his eyes again, his whole body froze in place. Wasn't this the Green Pine Manor where he had lived as a child? More terrifying still, the skin at his fingertips felt smooth and delicate, with none of the roughness worn raw by curses in his previous life. The next moment, memories came flooding back like a rising tide. The scenes of the world's catastrophe churned wildly in his mind. He sprang upright from the bed. In his memories, it had clearly been a bitter winter, and he had stood atop a snowy mountain watching Arthur and the others leave him behind without mercy. But now, what his skin felt was the stifling heat of midsummer. Crash could not help letting out a low laugh. He had really stolen Arthur's return. But as he laughed, confusion crept in again. How exactly had he managed to steal it? Everyone in the world believed that Crash's Black Hood could steal freely without limit, but no one knew that it had a fatal flaw. Every time the skill was activated, it would instantly generate a lock, and only after opening that lock could he begin the theft. And the difficulty of that lock depended entirely on how much the owner valued the target. Even if it were only an ordinary stone by the roadside, if the owner treasured it like a jewel, the unlocking conditions would skyrocket to the extreme. For a heaven-defying ability like Return, the other party would surely value it immensely, so the difficulty of stealing it should have exploded exponentially. Crash once again recalled the scene before his rebirth. Black Hood had indeed activated successfully at that time, but he had not seen that lock at all. If the lock had not even appeared, could it be that Arthur had already wanted to abandon this skill? That man known as the King of Heroes would occasionally reveal an expression of extreme exhaustion, as if carrying a 1,000-pound burden, walking alone again and again into a world doomed to destruction. Perhaps to him, endless returns had long since lost all meaning, leaving only utter weariness of body and mind, until he could no longer endure it. After a long silence, Crash slowly raised his head. In that case, so be it. He had merely taken something Arthur wanted to throw away. Arthur ought to thank him instead. Before leaving the room, Crash looked at himself in the mirror. He looked about 10 years old, not very tall, but the lines of muscle in his arms were firm and tight, evidence of many years of sword training. After all, behind Crash stood Valheim, the strongest martial family in the kingdom of Starin. Judging by the timeline in his memory, he was now exactly at the age just before participating in the family's proof ceremony. The so-called proof ceremony was a central event for the Valheim family. It determined which god a family member could make a contract with and what kind of skill they would be granted. This was the ultimate occasion for proving one's power. The higher the rank of the contracted god, the brighter the future, so direct bloodline descendants had always been cherished. But Crash was the only exception. He was born without talent in martial arts, received no favor from any god during the proof ceremony, and became the laughingstock of the entire family. After that, he was driven out of the main house and exiled to this Green Pine Manor, which was specifically used to house failures. But no one knew that this publicly acknowledged family disgrace now carried in his mind all the secrets of the world's end, a doomsday that even Azure Generation could not stop. Now that he had become the one who returned, then, he should be able to stop all of this, right? He suddenly clenched his fist tight, his eyes hardening with determination. This was not a matter of whether he could or couldn't, it was a matter of necessity. If the world were destroyed, he would perish with it. As soon as he reached the staircase, a familiar figure made Crash's pupils contract sharply. Old butler Arioto was bowing to him respectfully. In his original memories, this butler, the only one in Green Pine Manor and the only person who had sincerely cared for him, would, at the age of 10, secretly poison him under the orders of his elder brother. That had been the first betrayal of Crash's life. Crash immediately fell into thought. His half-sister Charlotte was a once-in-a-thousand-years genius of the Valheim family, and had already earned the title of Sword Saint at the age of 15. It was precisely because of this that Valheim had been able to shake off its decline and restore its prestige. Meanwhile, Varokian Valheim of another family branch stared at Charlotte's back with sinister eyes. He had to obtain the position of Valheim's first heir. Attacking Charlotte directly was far too risky, and her mother was equally troublesome, so Varokin set his sights on Crash instead. Soon after, Varokin naturally approached Arioto. He slowly pushed a bottle of potion emitting a strange aura in front of Arioto. As long as that worthless thing drinks a single drop, your daughter's treatment costs, along with your debts, can all be settled at once. Arioto closed his eyes. Young Master Crash was a child he had raised with his own hands. He could not bring himself to betray his conscience. Varokin's gaze stabbed over like a cold blade. So you're going to choose someone else's child over your own daughter? In his previous life, this should have been the day Arioto made his move against Crash, but in the end, he could not overcome that final barrier in his heart, and chose to take his own life instead. He drank the bowl of poison soup that had originally been meant for Crash, collapsed on the cold floor on the spot, and never woke up again. Looking at the still-living Arioto before him, Crash spoke in a voice so cold it held not the slightest trace of warmth. "Where did you hide the poison my brother Varokin gave you?" Arioto's whole body stiffened, and his face turned deathly pale in an instant. He hurriedly waved his hands, saying he knew nothing about any poison. Crash stepped closer. "How long are you going to keep pretending? For your daughter's illness, you were already prepared to throw away worthless trash like me." Hearing those words, Arioto's face turned completely ashen. Crash sighed lightly in his heart. In his previous life, it was exactly this sort of pressure that had driven Arioto to a dead end, and the reason he had received such an order really had been because of him. Arioto stood there in a daze. He had thought Crash would be furious, but Crash was not. Instead, it was as though he had already forgiven him. Crash extended his hand, his tone softening slightly. "If you want me to forgive you, you can. But there is one condition." The scene shifted to the public library of Green Pine Manor. Crash stopped walking, turned his head, and ordered Arioto to split open the wall behind them. Arioto was completely stunned, suspecting that he had heard wrong. Crash spoke calmly. "As the butler of the Valheim family, that shouldn't be difficult, should it?" Arioto immediately drew the sword at his waist. The next second, he spun around and swung the sword fiercely at the wall. Accompanied by the thunderous collapse of broken stone, a deep hidden passage was suddenly revealed behind the wall. Arioto was so shocked he could not close his mouth. There was actually a secret passage hidden in such a place. Crash could not help recalling an old incident. In his previous life, after a great fire, Green Pine Manor was reduced to ashes, and this unknown hidden passage disappeared along with it, and the point to which he had returned happened to be just before that fire. Arioto looked at the heavy chain locking the entrance and quickly asked whether he should cut through the lock as well. Crash raised his hand to stop him. "No need. No matter what you do, you won't be able to cut through this lock." As soon as the words fell, dense shadow energy surged out from Crash's body and condensed into a cackling shadow monster. The next second, the monster stretched out its sharp claws and slashed fiercely at the huge lock, while countless shadowed tentacles that followed lashed wildly at the chain. With a harsh tearing sound, the heavy chain snapped on the spot. Crash lifted the chain with one hand and weighed it slightly. It seemed his skill still had not recovered to its peak. Arioto was so shocked that he lost his voice, and asked in a trembling tone, "Young master, have you already made a contract with a god? Otherwise how could you possibly possess this kind of power?" Crash paused. He had almost forgotten that, in everyone else's eyes, he was indeed a complete good-for-nothing right now. He could only answer vaguely, something like that. "I just made a contract with an unimportant god. As for the matter of the study, whether you report it to father is up to you." Arioto was still immersed in shock. Until yesterday, Crash had been like a walking corpse, but overnight, he seemed like a different person, even possessing power comparable to that of one contracted with a god. At that thought, he clenched his teeth and made his stance clear. Before Crash achieved his goal, he would not reveal a single word to anyone. Crash understood instantly in his heart. This was the price of returning, when he made different choices, Arioto's path of fate would also be rewritten. But the Arioto who had once betrayed him still lived in his memory. Had Arthur let him steal return so easily back then because of this kind of deviation of fate as well? If Crash could cure Arioto's daughter's illness, then Arioto would inevitably become truly loyal to him. Right now, he had to increase the number of usable pieces as quickly as possible. But before that, the thing inside the hidden passage was his first target. Crash's gaze locked firmly onto the heavy wooden door ahead. The next second, he suddenly raised his right palm, and scorching energy instantly gathered there. The high temperature made the surrounding air tremble. Crash's whole body shivered, and goosebumps rose across his skin. This intense sensation could not be mistaken. The secret manual of Ancestor Damaris was behind that door. Because this hidden passage had originally been the secret route of the Valheim family. Here were completely recorded the techniques and memories of every failure from the elder branches of the Valheim family across generations. These were not skills bestowed by the gods, but crystallizations forged by human blood and sweat, precious legacies left behind by failures who had pursued the peak. At first, this place had been open to everyone, until the appearance of one person caused it to be completely sealed off. That person was the ancestor Damaris Valheim. That man, regarded as the most worthless in the family's history, underwent a transformation after encountering the world's erosion and became the strongest of his generation. Damaris was both the greatest failure and the strongest existence in Valheim's history. Back then, when he wielded that power, the world's top experts challenged him one after another. But the result was without suspense. Not one of them could stop him. Afterward, he absorbed all the curse power eroding the world and turned it to his own use, leaving behind a manual on how to control that power. Unfortunately, because of the passage of time, part of the manual had been lost. Crash had once failed to understand why a powerhouse like Damaris had ultimately become a mad monster. Only now did he understand. He had been unable to control the power of erosion, and after losing control, he had completely broken down. In his previous life, after Crash was struck by the world's erosion, he had used Blackhood to weaken the curse, then used other curses to neutralize it, barely managing to hold on. By the same logic, when facing the loss of control from extreme blood immersion recorded in Damaris's manual, as long as Crash could steal a controllable curse, he could use it to clash against and neutralize that power. When the two forces collided and devoured each other, in the end, Crash would be able to become as strong as Damaris. At that thought, Crash gave Arioto an order in a deep voice. From today onward, no one was allowed to enter Green Pine Manor. At the same time, at the Valheim main house, Verokeen abruptly tore the letter in his hand to pieces. Arioto actually dared to reject his proposal for the sake of that publicly acknowledged piece of trash. And that so-called swordsmanship genius Charlotte, along with the exiled worthless fool Crash, both of them were making his fury boil at this very moment. If not for that woman's tainted blood having mixed into the family, he and Sister Lilith would have been able to firmly secure the position of the legitimate bloodline. With that thought, he signaled his subordinate to immediately make a trip to Green Pine Manor and find out why that old fool Arioto had suddenly changed his mind. But the subordinate showed a troubled expression. Arioto stood holding a longsword, blocking the gate like a guardian deity, declaring that even the family head could not enter at will. Meanwhile, inside the secret library, Crash sat cross-legged, surrounded by shadow energy that made one's heart tremble. A moment later, the corners of Crash's lips slowly lifted. Was he finally about to step into the threshold of entry-level expert? It turned out that the aura system in this world had 4 realms in total: Aura User, Aura Expert, Aura Master, and Aura Emperor. The first stage was merely learning how to use Battle Aura. The second stage, Expert, was practically the dividing line between ordinary people and geniuses, and also the level with the largest number of people. And Charlotte, who was only 2 years older than Crash, was already close to becoming an Aura Master. Even after being reborn, her talent still took Crash by surprise. But very soon, Crash's gaze darkened. Even if Charlotte was that kind of monster, she would still be powerless in the face of the world's destruction. After finishing his training, Crash took the towel and casually wiped away his sweat. He was somewhat puzzled as to why Arioto had specially waited for him here. The next moment, Arioto's expression suddenly turned solemn. "Young master, your fiancée, Miss Bianca Hardenhearts, has arrived at Green Pine Manor." Crash's pupils contracted sharply at once, and that terrifying title instantly flashed through his mind. The White Devil, Bianca, the future puppet of the world's erosion, and the culprit who would personally ignite the cataclysm that destroyed the world. The terrifying existence who had once defeated one of the top 10 strongest in the world and made the entire continent tremble by her strength alone. Yet the small figure in the courtyard at this moment was clearly only the disregarded youngest daughter of the Hardenhars family. Valheim wanted to get rid of useless trash like Crash, while the Hardenhearts family, rulers of the North, wanted to use the marriage alliance to climb their way into the strongest martial noble house. At its core, this deal was nothing more than both sides treating them as tools. Crash rested his chin on his hand, a shrewd gleam passing through his eyes. He had originally planned to seek Bianca out himself, but he had not expected her to deliver herself to his door. And besides, he knew Bianca's background all too well. The youngest daughter of the Hardenhearts family, rulers of the North, was born only because her mother had suffered the world's erosion while pregnant. As a result, the curse called Snow Doll had been inherited through the bloodline, becoming an inescapable brand she was born with. The curse was deeply rooted in her soul, so much so that even the greatest cursebreakers were helpless against it. Her polluted body was even incapable of forming a contract with a god. She was a child born at the cost of her mother's life, and thus had been regarded as ominous from birth, suffering cold treatment and exclusion in the Hardenhearts family. Seen this way, Bianca probably hated Crash very much right now, didn't she? Crash then smiled in relief. It didn't matter, as long as it didn't interfere with him taking away her curse. Because Snow Doll was precisely the key in his plan for suppressing the loss of control of extreme blood immersion. At that moment, a scene from 5 months earlier suddenly flashed through Crash's mind. He had once driven Bianca away in a harsh tone. "Get out. Your Hardenhearts family just wants to seize Valheim's power, so stop pretending to be my fiancé." He remembered Bianca clenching her fists tightly at the time, while the door slammed shut in front of her, leaving her alone in the empty and icy corridor. And her father's voice still echoed in her ears. "For the survival of the Hardenhearts family, we have no other choice. Bianca, you're pretty enough. You will definitely win over the younger son of the Valheim family." Even without feelings involved, she could still tell right from wrong. If her family had not forced her into this political marriage, she would never have had any contact with that worthless fool with a filthy mouth. The scene returned to the reception room of Green Pine Manor, where Crash now wore a gentle smile. "I can't believe the servants actually poured you tea this hot. I'll deal with them in a moment." Bianca sat expressionlessly, her hands unconsciously tightening around the teacup. Crash quickly pointed outside the window. "The weather's nice today. Would you like to take a walk in the courtyard? There should be plenty of flowers there that can't be seen in the north." As he spoke, he turned and instructed Arioto to bring macadamia snacks to the courtyard. Crash's smile did not fade. "Bianca, you must be very tired from traveling all this way. Since we're engaged, we should get to know each other properly." Bianca silently followed behind Crash, but her response was full of suspicion. Crash could not help glancing back, his tone casual as though mentioning it in passing. "The way you speak sounds more like you're talking to a superior officer than to your fiancé." Bianca remained silent, but a storm surged in her heart. Something was wrong, definitely wrong somewhere. The last time they had met, Crash's eyes had been like poison blades, but today he was like a completely different person. Even stranger, she had never told him that she liked macadamia snacks. Bianca stared at Crash's back, and her heart suddenly tightened. Killing intent. She had caught a fleeting trace of killing intent from Crash. That was the kind of aura only someone who had gone through life-and-death battles would possess, and it absolutely should not have appeared on that worthless fool who only knew how to complain about the world. In truth, Crash no longer remembered exactly how he had treated Bianca in the past, but he remembered the cold and distant expression on her face at this moment. Exactly the same as the day she died in front of the pavilion by the North Sea. Thinking of that, Crash immediately piled on a bright smile. "Bianca, you don't have to be so surprised. I recently made a contract with a god, so both my personality and my strength have changed a lot." Bianca nodded lightly, and more than half of the suspicion in her heart instantly dissipated. So it was a divine contract, then these changes make sense. Then she began calculating inwardly again. Crash was being so attentive. Could it be that he wanted to take the initiative to break off the engagement? After all, the current him no longer needed to rely on a political marriage to prove himself. Crash suddenly paused, as if seeing through her thoughts, then deliberately put on a dejected look and said that he could understand why she would not want to marry him, and why she would want to dissolve the engagement. Seeing him like this, Bianca felt a trace of indescribable emotion rise in her heart. He was a direct son of the Valheim family, and he had clearly already gained a god's recognition, so why was his self-esteem still so fragile? A dark gloom passed through Bianca's eyes, yet her tone was exceptionally firm. "I am your fiancé. That will never change." Those words made Crash freeze on the spot. Looking at her utterly unwavering expression, he felt an inexplicable warmth in his heart. How long had it been since he had heard words so genuine? Soon after, Crash cleared his throat and got straight to the point. He wanted to use his awakened ability to take away the Snow Doll curse from her body. Bianca's face filled with disbelief, Was Crash planning to transfer the curse onto himself? That was something even famous curse breakers could do nothing about, and he actually wanted to bear it voluntarily? Crash's tone was calm, yet firm beyond question. Give it to me. I can fulfill any one wish of yours, even if what you want is to dissolve our engagement. He had calculations of his own as well. Without feelings involved, it would actually be easier to negotiate. Bianca was also tired of this political marriage, so exchanging the broken engagement for the curse would be nothing but profit for him. But Bianca's thoughts drifted elsewhere. She thought of Crash's position in the family as a discarded failure, and guessed that there must be a rift between him and the direct bloodline. Maybe Crash was simply sick of everything, so sick of it that he wanted to completely abandon his own emotions? A mental magic user had once told her, when a person's spirit reaches its limit, their heart will become sick. They may begin to deny themselves, or they may suddenly become like a different person. That does not necessarily mean danger, it is a sign that they are heading toward their end. If someone around you becomes like that, you must stay by their side. So Bianca began to suspect that it was not that Crash had gained a god's recognition, but that something had gone wrong with his mind. Bianca suddenly held Crash's hands. It's okay, Crash. I believe you can get through this. You don't need to rely on curse arts, you just need to learn how to control your emotions. Crash looked utterly confused and froze completely. Bianca, did you misunderstand something? Bianca did not respond to him at all, and instead continued talking on her own, saying that she would come visit him often in the future. Crash was directly dumbfounded. Don't you hate me? Bianca's eyes remained just as firm even if she did hate him. She could not abandon someone standing at the edge of a cliff. Crash's heart sank, and he understood instantly. Once Bianca decided on something, she would carry it through to the end. But she had clearly misunderstood him. With that thought, Crash quietly activated Black Hood, and shadows wound themselves around Bianca's wrist. The next second, Crash's whole body trembled. The unlocking condition for stealing her curse was actually, become Bianca's friend. Worse still, it had triggered the extremely rare double lock. This curse had coexisted with her for so long that the system had already judged it to be part of her body. And the unlocking condition was actually friend. That was far rarer than being her fiancé. Bianca already had no feelings for Crash, and she was also indifferent and numb toward most things. If he let her return to the Hardenhearts family, it would only accelerate her transformation into the White Devil, so he had to keep her by his side. That way, he could both prevent her fall and slowly search for a chance to unlock the condition. Thinking of that, Crash immediately put on a smile. Hearing her say that made him very happy, and he also hoped he could see his fiancée often. A little while later, he stood at the door watching Bianca's carriage gradually disappear into the distance. After all, the matter of seeing each other often would first require her father's permission. As for Bianca's next visit, it would probably be about a month later. Before then, Crash had to read more secret manuals and raise his strength further. Time quickly moved to the next day. A carriage stopped at the entrance, piled high with all sorts of daily necessities. When Crash turned at the sound, he was shocked to see Bianca appear at the manor gate. She greeted him in her usual calm tone. Good morning, Crash. She had decided to live a Green Pine Manor starting today. Please take care of me from now on. The scene shifted, and Crash slowly opened his eyes. The moment he turned his head, he saw Bianca curled up quietly by the bedside, fast asleep. Looking at that small figure, Crash could not help complaining inwardly. Bianca had slept here again last night. If anyone saw this, they would definitely misunderstand. Even after stepping onto the training grounds, Crash still felt somewhat distracted. Only then did he suddenly realize it had already been several months since he and Bianca began living together. He remembered how she had suddenly appeared at Green Pine Manor back then, calmly saying that she would be living here from that day onward. Thinking about it now, Bianca had always been emotionally detached, and perhaps her feelings toward her family were equally faint. This kind of numbness might instead become the breakthrough for Crash to become her friend. Time passed, and in the blink of an eye it was the end of the year. The opening day of Laren Academy was drawing closer and closer. That was an academy jointly founded by the 4 great kingdoms and the Empire, dedicated to cultivating talent to combat the world's erosion. And it only admitted 16-year-old students. In his previous life, it had also trained countless members of Azure Generation, that group of people who possessed cheat-level abilities. At that thought, Crash secretly clenched his fists. He had the experience of his previous life and knew the weaknesses of those people. As long as he enrolled, he would have the chance to steal their abilities one by one. But recently his growth had seemed to hit a bottleneck. Relying only on the Ancestor's secret manual, he could at most reach the beginner level of entry-level expert. It seemed he had to steal Bianca's snow doll as soon as possible. Then, when Crash pushed open the doors of the training grounds, he indeed saw Bianca sitting to one side waiting for him. He casually asked, "You're waiting here for me again today?" Bianca stood up and answered seriously, yes. She could not let Crash stay by himself. Ever since she had moved in, she had followed Crash around like a hatchling bird. Even when he went to the bathroom, she would ask about it. Crash scratched his head helplessly. Just how long would it take before Bianca treated him as a friend? At that moment, Bianca suddenly held a book and asked him whether he wanted to go out and have some fun together. She had received an invitation to the Sanctuary of Stars. It was an annual social event held by the Kingdom of Starin for minors, and unless there were special circumstances, all invited nobles were required to attend. Crash instantly recalled memories from his previous life. Before his return, he had locked himself away in Green Pine Manor and had no impression of this event, but that person should be there too. And moreover, most of the participants at the Sanctuary of Stars would likely humiliate Bianca because of Crash's reputation as a worthless fool. Bianca's eyes sparkled. It didn't matter. Protecting one's partner was the duty of a fiancé. Crash gently reached out and touched her head. I'm not asking about the duty of a fiancé, Bianca. I'm asking what you really think. Bianca found herself unable to speak for a moment. During this time, Crash had treated her so well that it felt unnatural. He would ask her what she wanted for breakfast. He would hold her hand and take her to the library to read. This kind of warmth was something she had never felt in the Hardenhearts family. Thinking of that, Bianca raised her head, her gaze clear and resolute. She would go with Crash, not as his fiancé, but by her own choice. A few days later, Crash and Bianca appeared in the banquet hall of the Sanctuary of Stars. In this world, the reason nobles were respected was because they were meant to resist the world's erosion in place of the common people. But could this crowd in front of him, drunk on parties and revelry, truly support the future of the Kingdom of Starin? A warm welcome to young Master Crash Valheim and Miss Bianca Hardenhearts. The moment the hostess finished speaking, the hall erupted into discussion. So that's the useless younger son of the Valheim family? And that beauty beside him must be the cursed daughter of that northern ruling family. What a waste of that face. I heard they've been engaged since childhood. Two misfits paired together. Well, I suppose they match. Crash remained expressionless, not caring in the slightest about the gossip of these hypocritical nobles. Stooping to their level would be the real disgrace. At that moment, a voice came from the crowd. So this is the young master of the Valheim family? Crash's gaze swept over the three people who had spoken. They would all join Azure Generation in the future and become the three heroes of the Kingdom of Starin. The reason they were interested in Crash was probably only one thing: Charlotte. Sure enough, the next second, Charlotte appeared wearing a red dress. She glanced at the nobles around her, her face full of disdain. The dress is fine, but the ones trying to flirt with me are all too weak. What Sanctuary of Stars? In her eyes, this place was more like a garbage dump. Bianca gently tugged at Crash's sleeve, her voice soft but firm, telling him not to mind the things people around them were saying. Crash's heart stirred. Bianca herself was also being talked about, yet she was worrying about him first. Just then, the hostess announced loudly once more, "Welcome Lord Darren Damferlion to the hall." The one who arrived was Damferlion, the prodigy among alchemists, the man in the castle who loved stealing the spotlight most, and also the key reason Crash had decided to attend the Sanctuary of Stars. Crash remembered that in the world before his return, his naked body had been covered in strange black wounds, as though tightly bound by dark vines. The next moment, an excited voice exploded by his ear. Your whole body is covered in curse marks. Just what have you gone through to become like this?" Damferlion immediately leaned in and carefully examined those runes, muttering rapidly, "An erosion-type curse. Mix this formula with that reagent, and it'll be solved in no time." As he spoke, he spread his arms and revealed a nearly crazed smile. "Then I'll begin right away." Crash's face was forcibly twisted to one side. He struggled desperately, but his mouth was squeezed out of shape, so he could only let out muffled screams. And that was Crash's first encounter with the world's greatest alchemist. The scene returned to the banquet hall of the Sanctuary of Stars, and while Damferlion's attention was drawn away by the gazes around him, Crash picked up a plate of delicate pastries from the long table and handed it to Bianca, telling her to wait here for him first. Bianca had her mouth full of food and only gave a muffled mm. As Crash turned to leave, he happened to meet Damferlion's scrutinizing gaze. That boy somehow felt strangely familiar to him. Damferlion's eyes suddenly lit up. He looks way too much like Charlotte Valheim. Could he be her younger brother? A provocative smile lifted at the corner of Crash's mouth. "So, noble alchemist, you're interested in me?" Damferlion's smile vanished in an instant. He narrowed his eyes, and his tone turned colder. "What a provocative little brat. Since you've successfully piqued my interest, you'd better be prepared for what comes next." In a room somewhere inside the banquet hall, Damferlion stood with his back to Crash and suddenly asked, "Young master of the Valheim family, how old are you this year?" Crash lowered his eyes, his voice calm yet firm beyond dispute. 13. Crash could more or less guess why Damferlion was asking. With the memories of his previous life, the way he spoke and acted always seemed far too mature. Damferlion raised one sword, then directly threw the other at Crash. Crash's pupils shrank as he hurriedly raised his arm and barely blocked the incoming blade with his sword hilt. His arm went numb from the impact, but he gritted his teeth, gripped the sword with both hands, and met Damferlion's blade head-on. The next instant, Crash suddenly swung back, and a sharp blue arc of aura traced along the sword's edge. Damferlion gritted his teeth as he blocked, his face full of disbelief. "Wasn't it said that you were a good-for-nothing waste?" Crash's expression did not change, but his mind was calculating rapidly. Against a scholar like this, brute force was meaningless. If he was going to strike, he had to strike at the thing Damferlion cared about most. He suddenly lowered his voice and spoke when their blades drew close. "That research of yours on neutralizing curses, I can help you with it." Damferlion's pupils contracted sharply. "How much alchemy could a useless trash like you possibly understand? And you dare talk about cooperation?" Crash steadily evaded the next blow, already certain in his heart that sentence had hit the mark exactly. Then he pressed the attack again, using other curses to neutralize the curses of those eroded by the world. The unsolved problem that cursebreakers still haven't managed to crack. If you want to become a first-rate alchemist, you have to prove it can work. Am I wrong? If you're willing, I can use my ability to steal curses to help you complete the research. Damferlion froze on the spot, fervor igniting in his eyes. Steal curses? But you're clearly someone who hasn't even mastered aura. If this were true, then it would be the perfect opportunity to prove both that curses are controllable and that his theory of neutralization was valid. Damferlion suddenly leaned in, his tone light and airy. "Then what do I have to give in return? Or is it that, you want to be my boyfriend?" Crash looked utterly disgusted and cut him off directly. "Enough nonsense. There's a high chance I'll end up with more than one curse in the future. I want you to make medicine that can suppress the backlash and keep me alive." After saying that, Crash's thoughts sank into the past. Stealing alone was far from enough. Even those monsters of Azure Generation had ultimately failed to stop the destruction of the world. For someone like him, a former failure, the only option was to use whatever means necessary. Medicine, techniques, anything that could make him stronger. He would seize all of it. Meanwhile, Damferlion thought of Charlotte's overwhelmingly genius-like presence. The brother and sister of the Valheim family. They really are both interesting. Then he abruptly changed the subject and asked Crash whether he wanted to attend the newly established Laren Academy. A smile tugged at Crash's lips. Did that even need asking? The academy would be full of abilities he could steal. It was practically a stage prepared just for him. Then Crash looked straight at Damferlion. "Besides that, I need one more thing from you. You know about fading disease, right? The incurable disease that turns the skin bluish-black and eventually kills the victim. I want you to make a cure for it." The smile on Damferlion's face stiffened at once. "Do you not understand what incurable disease means? Even if I'm the kingdom's finest alchemist, I can't do that." Crash replied softly, "But in the end, you did manage it. It just took a very long time. When you finally make the cure, come find me at Green Pine Manor." Before parting from Damferlion, Crash threw out one more question. "I've always been curious. Do you happen to like my sister Charlotte very much?" After getting an affirmative answer, Crash pressed further. "Then why did you say there was an empty place beside you, and even suggest that I be your boyfriend?" Damferlion interlaced his fingers and wore a mysterious smile. Young Master Crash is still too inexperienced. "Actually, I like boys too." Crash's whole body froze, so shocked that he could not say a single word. He violently shook off Damferlion's hand, turned, and bolted straight out. But just as he reached the entrance of the banquet hall, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. A strange man was gripping Bianca's wrist tightly. The next second, Crash moved like lightning, cutting straight through the crowd and driving a heavy, muffled flying kick directly into the man's face. His voice was as cold as a blade. "Who gave you the nerve to lay hands on someone who belongs to me?" His gaze turned icy as he stepped closer bit by bit. "She's only 12, and you can still bring yourself to touch her? Trash like you stains the world just by staying alive." The man staggered back in panic and pointed into the crowd as he shouted an explanation. He had only come to take Bianca away under Princess Claudia's orders. The crowd instantly erupted. The second princess gave the order? Crash's pupils contracted sharply. Claudia Starin, the woman in the royal family most skilled at political schemes. His gaze shifted slightly and landed on the small figure standing in the corner. Bianca carried the bloodline of the rulers of the north, yet because of her curse, she was looked down on by the nobility. The princess had always used only loyal attendants, so why summon Bianca of all people? There had to be a trap behind it. From the corner of his eye, Crash swept the shadows, where several noble figures were secretly watching. There was even a blurry silhouette emerging in the darkness, a strange smile hanging on its lips. Crash suddenly remembered a name, Yennex Glazer, the guy who had always clung to his sister Charlotte. After being publicly defeated at the Sanctuary of Stars, he had come to hate Charlotte, yet still could not stop admiring her. He knew he could never beat Charlotte, so he had set his sights on her younger brother, Crash, instead. Crash let out a cold laugh, pitifully clumsy, but what right did he have to drag Bianca into it too? Crash stepped forward, his tone steady. Take me there, but I'm not going to see the second princess, I want to see Yennex. He turned to look at Bianca, yet inwardly he felt even more puzzled. He could see through the fact that Yennex was behind this because of the memories from before his return. But 10-year-old Bianca could not possibly know that. So why had she dared to disobey the princess's order? Crash looked straight into Bianca's eyes and asked why she had not listened to the princess. Bianca slowly lowered her gaze. Because you told me to wait here earlier. Hearing those words, Crash froze completely. The next second, he raised a hand and gently ruffled Bianca's hair. Well done, Bianca. The moment he pushed the door open, a young boy wandered over while stretching lazily. Short ash-white hair, furry beast ears, he was the Tiger Tribe boy Barak Hogg, a highly skilled dual swordsman with an unpredictable personality. Crash remained expressionless and said that he wanted to see Yennex. Barak smiled and pointed toward the depths of the palace, saying Yennex had been waiting for quite a while. Crash's body stiffened slightly. He had not wanted to get entangled with this nuisance, yet somehow he had run right into him anyway. The next second, Barak suddenly grabbed Crash by the shoulder and proposed, "Let's fight and decide who's stronger." Crash refused coldly. Private duels between nobles are forbidden at the Sanctuary of Stars. Barak abruptly leaned in close, his provocation undisguised. "But I just thought, Charlotte, you're her brother, so you should know how to fight too, right? Though you look way weaker than she is." Crash sneered inwardly. The rumors were indeed true. When Barak fought Charlotte, he had shown even more brightly than Yennex, and among top-tier fighters, he was actually superior by a notch. Not to mention that beast-like, unpredictable combat instinct of his. But before meeting Yennex, Crash truly did not want to be tied up by him. But battle intent was plainly visible in Barak's beast-like vertical pupils. He clearly had no intention of letting Crash off easily. The next moment, Crash raised his hand and precisely caught Barak's incoming punch. Barak's face filled with shock. He had not expected Crash to take it so easily. Crash's eyes turned cold, and with a sudden burst of force from his arm, he slammed Barak to the ground as though tossing away trash. Before Barak could react, Crash planted a foot on his back, and followed up with another heavy punch. Barak clutched his stomach and collapsed limply on the ground in pain. Crash straightened up and slowly let out a breath of turbid air, his gaze returning to calm as though the previous burst of violence had never existed. Barak struggled to get up. "Crash, you really didn't hold back at all." Crash rubbed his neck and corrected him. "You were the one who provoked me first." Barak excitedly stretched out a hand. "Great, but before we continue, can he at least use a weapon?" Crash's gaze darkened, and he instinctively glanced at Barak's swaying body. More importantly, could he even still stand? The smile on Barak's face froze instantly, and the next second his legs gave out and his body fell straight backward. With a dull thud, he passed out on the spot. Bianca quickly walked over, a trace of hard-to-detect worry in her eyes, and asked Crash what exactly he had done. With his back to her, Crash answered calmly that he had used a secret art of the Valheim family. It was an ancient forbidden technique created by Valheim exiles, capable of unleashing the maximum destructive force at the shortest distance possible. Under specific conditions, it could even pierce armor and directly shake the internal organs. This was also the only secret art recovered before Green Pine Manor was burned down in his previous life. In that life, it was precisely by relying on this that Crash had dragged himself back from the brink of death again and again. A short while later, Yennex looked at the fallen Barak, surprise in his voice. "Hard to believe. A widely known waste like you actually defeated Barak." Crash let out a helpless breath. "You placed him here on purpose, didn't you? To test me. And you used the second princess to lure me out. Since that's the case, of course I had to come see the man behind it in person." Yennex looked Crash up and down with interest. "How did you figure it out? How strange. The ore you're showing is completely different from the rumors I heard." Crash deliberately paused. "Or should I say, the rumor that I'm a failure was spread by you. But if today you lose to me, the famously worthless young master." As he spoke, the corner of his mouth curved into a confident arc. "Then the rumors outside should be rewritten. Am I right, Yennex?" From Laren Academy to the founding of Azure Generation, Crash and Yennex Glazer had once walked side by side for quite a long time. You could call them friends, but Crash understood him too well. He approached anyone only for profit, and people like that were best at hiding dirty knives behind smiles. Scenes from his previous life surged violently into his mind. It was during one of Azure Generation's field missions. Crash had struggled and cried out in despair, begging Yannick's to save him. But there had been only one thought left in Yannick's mind. If the higher-ups discovered that it was his own blunder that had led the whole squad into annihilation, and with the vicious internal power struggles in the organization, he would certainly be kicked out of Azure Generation. But if he survived, no one would ever know the truth. Yannick had stepped out of the shadows wearing an even gentler smile, saying he would pin everything on Crash. After all, everyone already disliked Crash, so the matter would most likely be quietly buried in the end. He had even sincerely thanked Crash for staying with him until the final moment of his life. Crash had roared on the spot, "When have you ever treated me as a friend? From the beginning, you only got close to me because of Charlotte, didn't you? You've been absent-minded all day today because Charlotte is getting married." Yannick suddenly cut him off with a sharp shout, and the gentleness on his face vanished instantly. That was exactly why he hated Crash. "You clearly have no ability at all, yet your instincts are disgustingly accurate, and you always love tearing open the truth without caring about the consequences. If Charlotte really gets married, then this fake relationship between us ends here today." Yannick stopped, then looked back at Crash. "But that's better this way. Charlotte doesn't need to hold a wedding and her younger brother's funeral on the same day." Just as Crash was about to lose his balance and fall, a hand grabbed him and pulled him back from the edge. That person was Arthur. That moment became the turning point that made them teammates, and also opened the curtain on another stretch of misfortune. In the end, after Arthur intervened, Yannick was expelled from Azure Generation. But seeing him again now, he seemed not to have changed at all. Yannick's voice pulled Crash back to the present. He said that both the way Crash spoke and his face were like Charlotte's. Purple-black energy instantly surged around Crash. "Don't casually say my sister's name. You think I'm like her? Then congratulations, you're not wrong. I'm just like her in one regard. I never refuse a challenge." The next moment, a fist wrapped in dark violet energy tore through the air. Crash threw a punch at Yannick, but the instant the blow descended, several thick vines burst out from the shadows, instantly binding Crash's limbs and waist tight. The force was savage to the extreme, and it slammed him viciously into the ground. Crash braced one hand against the floor and barely steadied himself. Yannick laughed lightly. "So that's all you've got? Crash, you should be using a weapon." He lifted a hand in a flourish. The Glazer family's unique secret art, using spiritual energy to strengthen and control plants, then relying on restorative skills to propagate them and make up for the upper limit of expenditure. Crash casually grabbed the vine wrapped around his arm and snapped it in two. Held in his hand, that piece of vine was instead like a perfectly usable short staff. "You want me to use a weapon? Fine. Then I'll use your wood to beat you." A cold arc rose at the corner of Yannick's mouth. "Then use that broken branch of yours and try blocking this." Before the words had even finished, countless sharp vines shot in from all directions. Crash's footwork spun rapidly, and the short staff danced into layer upon layer of afterimages, precisely smashing apart every vine thrust at him. Yannick's smile froze at once. He dodged all of them? How is that possible? If it were a genius like Charlotte, that'd be one thing, but has he awakened some kind of heavenly eye ability? But no matter how much he thought about it, he would never know. Crash was his natural bane. Because before returning, Crash had already seen through all of his tricks, and by that point had grown utterly tired of them. Then Crash paused and stabbed right into the place that hurt most. "Yannick, you were thinking about Charlotte again just now, weren't you?" Yannick's face darkened, and he slammed a fist into the ground, angrily ordering Crash to show some respect when he spoke. The next instant, a giant wooden arm burst out of the earth, carrying a destructive force as it smashed down toward Crash's head. At that moment, Charlotte's startled cry suddenly came from behind the door. The instant she rushed out, that gigantic creature had already risen high enough to blot out the sky. If it struck him head-on, Crash would be crushed into a bloody pulp. But Crash slowly lowered his head, and in his mind appeared the thinnest booklet from the secret archive of Green Pine Manor. Its author was a certain ancestor of the Valheim family, a man who had possessed no talent for martial arts in his entire life and had only swung a sword day after day. Not until the age of 80, in the twilight of his life, did he write that manual. There was only one short passage in the book, yet it contained the essence of his lifelong sword practice. It was the realm of 5 as 1, something no short-term training could ever reach. But Crash had once been forced into hopeless situations by curses countless times, had struggled over and over at the edge of life and death, and by sheer force had comprehended this ancestral secret art. The sword is me, and I am the sword. If there is no weapon, then let the will itself become the sword. With that thought settled, Crash raised his hand, and in his palm gathered aura of ultimate purity. A dazzling white sword light shot into the sky like a blade of dawn, cleaving straight into that enormous fist. The next second, the fist was split in two from the center. The crack spread all the way through the giant's body, and the sword light became unstoppable, blowing the entire massive figure apart into countless fragments. Charlotte and Bianca, who had just arrived, stood at the doorway staring blankly at the scene, almost forgetting how to breathe. Yannick's face was full of disbelief, as though he had just seen something impossible. Through the dust, Crash slowly walked out, the dark purple energy already withdrawn, leaving only the sharpness in his eyes. Don't get carried away again in the future, Yannick, understand? You worthless trash. Yannick no longer had even the slightest trace of arrogance left. His eyes were hollow, like an empty shell that had lost its soul. But in the very next second, Crash's body sagged with exhaustion. He had originally wanted to conserve some strength and slowly plunder that guy's skill later. But that ancestral sword intent just now had almost drained every ounce of strength from his body, and his limbs felt as heavy as lead. At that moment, soft footsteps came from behind him, and a pair of arms steadily supported him. It was Bianca, her cheek pressed against Crash's back, and a bone-piercing yet strangely soothing cold magical power slowly seeped from her palms into Crash's body. Crash's body jerked violently, and then he involuntarily threw back his head with a hoarse cry, while Damferlion's voice, for once, carried panic. He rushed over quickly and, without another word, hoisted the unconscious Crash onto his shoulder, while behind him the banquet hall had already exploded into uproar. What was that just now? I heard that the Valheim family's waste defeated Yannick? Damferlion listened with one ear, the corner of his lips curving into an amused arc. The rumors were spreading even faster than he had expected. He lowered his head to look at Crash's sleeping profile, his eyes growing slightly darker. I really don't know whether this kid is unbelievably bold, or simply has no brain at all. But no matter what, when he wakes up, the entire noble circle of Starin will remember the name Crash Valheim. He lifted his head toward the night sky and murmured in a low voice, before I help him complete the research on curse neutralization. I absolutely cannot die. In the blink of an eye, 7 days had passed. Crash trained day and night with the sword in the training grounds and finally completely rid himself of the aftereffects of that strike. If he had forcibly used that ancestral secret art again in succession at the time and pushed himself into another desperate situation, Crash's end would only have been worse than Yannick's. On the carriage ride back that day, Crash had remained unconscious for a full day. If he had not passed out midway from exhaustion, he would at least have been able to finish laying the groundwork for plundering Yannick's skill. In truth, Crash had long prepared 2 plans for taking skills. The first was the standard unlocking process of the talent Blackhood. The second was to force the opponent into self-doubt, making them deny from the bottom of their heart the value of their own skill. For Yannick, Crash had originally planned to use the second method. It was more convenient. He only had to crush his opponent with overwhelming superiority, and Yannick's proud family secret art had been broken by Crash with a single sword strike. His faith in his own skill had collapsed on the spot. After being crushed by someone he regarded as trash, Yannick would sooner or later begin doubting himself. Crash tightened his grip on the sword hilt, his eyes resolute. Even if it took time, Yannick's life-saving recovery skill would eventually fall into his hands. There was only 1 year left before entering Laren Academy. In order to catch up to, and even surpass, those so-called geniuses, Crash had originally intended to throw all of his time into training. But Arioto's figure suddenly appeared at the entrance to the courtyard. Young Master Crash, Lord Verokin has arrived at Green Pine Manor. Crash sneered inwardly. My dear brother, finally couldn't hold back any longer. He simply slumped into a chair in the sitting room. Let him in. Just as Arioto withdrew, Bianca came over carrying a glass of water. She frowned slightly and said that Crash smelled strongly of sweat. Crash froze for a moment and instinctively tugged at his collar to sniff himself. He had probably grown so used to the stench of the world's erosion in his previous life that his sense of smell had long become dulled. But it made sense. When battle aura was circulated at full strength to temper the body, impurities were expelled together with sweat. Bianca's expression remained cold, yet there was stubborn insistence in it. Before seeing Verokin, you should wash up first. Crash waved a hand, looking entirely unconcerned. I'm still going to have to fight later, so washing now would be pointless. I'll still have to move around afterward, so washing now would be pointless. Bianca immediately took half a step back, her whole body full of refusal. Then before that, please do not come near me. Crash froze on the spot and raised an eyebrow in return. Bianca, are you giving orders to your fiancé? Looking at her flustered appearance, something suddenly lit up in Crash's heart. In his previous life, trapped in destruction and struggle, he had never experienced such relaxed everyday moments. Those people who had fought beside him, especially Arthur, if he saw the current Crash being so lax, he would probably glare coldly at him with those eternally tense eyes. Arthur had always been a hero who stood on the very front line and never relaxed. So where was he now, and what was he doing? Just then, a cold voice came from outside the door. "Looks like you're having a lot of fun with your fiancé, Crash." Crash turned and looked at the man at the doorway, Verokin Valheim, his third elder brother with ambition written all over his face. Verokin's gaze stabbed him like icy blades. "Those rumors about you defeating Yenix, are they all true?" Crash, who in the past had been afraid even to look Verokin in the eye, could now meet his gaze calmly. He gave a light laugh and asked instead, "Brother, on the other hand, you should be terribly busy. What brings you to a remote place like Green Pine Manor?" Verokin paused slightly, clearly not expecting Crash to dare answer back. He turned his head and spoke with obvious provocation in his tone. "I heard Laren Academy doesn't care about family background and only admits based on results. Since that's the case, you should prepare properly too." Those words made Verokin's face instantly turn ashen. Even the strongest empire feared the Valheim family of Starin, and as a legitimate direct-line heir, he had no need to take such procedures seriously at all. A contemptuous smile rose on Verokin's lips. "Don't get carried away just because you defeated trash like Yenix." Crash lifted his head and pretended not to understand. "From an ordinary person's perspective, isn't it normal to worry about exams?" Verokin gave a dry cough and used it to shift the topic. He had come today to deliver a family order. Crash was to go to Grillik Volcano and stop the world's erosion there. Crash's pupils contracted sharply. The family's erosion missions were clearly mandatory only after the age of 15. Verokin's gaze was deliberately pressuring as he said Crash need not worry, because during the mission he would accompany him in the capacity of guardian. "Since you can defeat Yenix, surely you won't shrink back over something this minor." Crash saw through it immediately. First test his strength, then bring him under control. He simply agreed openly. "Then let's leave now." Compared with the peaceful daily life of this period, Crash had always been more accustomed to dealing with erosion. Even if this was a trap, he had already thought of a way out. At that moment, Bianca came over quickly with a book in her arms and asked where Crash was going. Crash explained briefly in a few simple sentences. Bianca frowned at once. "But sending a 13-year-old child to stop the world's erosion, that's absurd." Verokin's face darkened immediately. "You curse Snow Woman, and you dare interfere in Valheim family matters?" Crash instantly pulled Bianca behind him and shielded her firmly. "She is my fiancé. A magnanimous elder brother surely wouldn't stoop to arguing with a 12-year-old child, would he?" Verokin gave a cold snort, turned around, and strode away. Crash smiled and rubbed the top of Bianca's head, praising her and saying he was very satisfied with how she had acted just now. Bianca hugged her book and looked confused, saying she had not done anything. Crash's hand paused in her hair, and he said softly, "It's fine even if you didn't realize it." Bianca lifted her head, seriousness filling her clear eyes, and asked Crash to make sure he took good care of himself. Crash turned and gripped the sword at his waist. "Then I wish you all the best, Bianca." After arriving at their destination, Crash discovered that Grillik Volcano had long since become unrecognizable. The mountain range that should have stood majestically now had broad stretches of swamp surfacing across it. This place had already been classified as a 3-star erosion extra-dimensional zone. So-called world erosion meant that reality was being gnawed away and worn down by another dimension, while corrupted life forms wandered everywhere. Once the erosion progressed too far, the entire region would become part of that other dimension completely. Crash looked around calmly, far too calm for a boy visiting for the first time. "The purification troops haven't moved out yet?" A knight answered with additional explanation. "Once the lord of this area is dealt with, the purification troops will move in immediately. And Lord Verokin is a high-level expert, so taking down the corrupted lord won't be difficult for him at all." But no one knew that Crash had another purpose for this trip, testing his temporary plan for suppressing Berserk. As he thought, he casually raised his sword and slashed forward. A giant beetle-like monster shattered on the spot. One knight could not help asking, "Have you dealt with world erosion before?" Crash lifted his chin, his tone carrying a touch of proud rebuttal. "I'm only 13. Wouldn't it be stranger if I had?" At the side, veins bulged on Verokin's forehead. This useless brat dares act this arrogant the moment he steps into an erosion zone? When he had first come here at 15, his pride had nearly been crushed. So what right did Crash have to stand here giving instructions to the knights? If he had grown up in the same environment as Charlotte, the failed product of Valheim might very well have been Verokin himself. Suppressing his emotions, Verokin spoke. "This is very likely a 3-star erosion lord capable of maintaining a physical form on its own. The next steps must be taken more cautiously." After hearing that, the knights' faces turned pale instantly, and their bodies stiffened. Looking at their backs, Crash thought to himself, it seemed he would not need to interfere. He should focus on his own objective. But in the next second, Crash's pupils suddenly widened. After mastering the family's secret art, his perception had already changed. He could now see through surface appearances and perceive the source of erosion. That clump of foul energy floating in the air was exactly the thing he had come here looking for. He abruptly raised his head and swallowed it without the slightest hesitation. The next second, bloodshot veins instantly filled his eyes, and a mouthful of sweet, fishy blood burst from him. The knights hurried over in alarm and asked if something was wrong. Even Verokin quickly approached, and there was actually a rare trace of concern in his tone. Was this Crash's first time here, and had he pushed himself too hard? If necessary, he could carry Crash back to camp. Crash slowly raised his head and calmly answered that he was fine. Just as extreme blood immersion described, force one's own aura into contact and fusion with erosion energy, then concentrate and observe the flow of that energy. If all went as expected, it would circulate ceaselessly like a river. Once erosion energy entered the body, it would be swept up and devoured by that torrent until it fused completely and became an entirely new color of reality that no other force could overwrite. In the next instant, Crash's pupils suddenly turned blood red. He straightened his body sharply, his power swelling so violently that even his muscles trembled. So this was the remnant of the strength left behind after Rampage. Crash looked at his own blood-stained, trembling hands, and his reason wavered before that destructive power. Perhaps it was time to use that forbidden art. After that incident, the secret archive of the Valheim family had been permanently sealed, and that forbidden technique had been thought lost forever, until one day, a blind ancestor had accidentally discovered the archive. But because of his blindness, he had been unable to interpret it and could only close the doors again. Yet he also understood that there would never be another person like him, so he secretly left behind a manual. That was the forbidden power Crash was about to use now. Soon after, a surging blue aura suddenly erupted around his body. This was the extrasensory perception built upon aura, using spirit energy alone as a sixth sense to perceive all things. Though it could currently extend only to his fingertips, that was enough for him to control the surrounding details. Crash raised his hand and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, but he understood clearly, this was only a temporary expedient. After all, absorbing erosion energy could go out of control at any moment. When that time came, Bianca Snowdoll would still be needed to suppress it. The next moment, Crash suddenly whipped around, and cold sweat instantly soaked his back. In midair, a massive lump of flesh was writhing madly. A twisted human face suddenly appeared before his eyes. Those eyes opened all at once. Then that lump of flesh slowly took shape and finally condensed into the outline of a man. Verokin immediately shouted a warning to everyone, saying that it was the 3-star Erosion Lord, the Thousand-Faced Demon. The accompanying family knights instantly drew their swords and stood on guard, their expressions heavy as if facing a deadly enemy. At the same time, blazing fire engulfed Verokin's body, leaving only a pair of icy eyes sweeping across the sea of flame. A nearby apprentice knight looked up, his face full of fanatical awe. Lord Verokin's flame magic is as astonishing as ever. It isn't just dazzling. The destructive power is enough to destroy anything, and this skill can burn whatever it touches into ashes. But Crash stared fixedly at that flaming sword. It was a shadow engraved into his bones, Ignis. In his previous life, it was this move that had completely burned away his left arm. Back then, Verokin had stomped Crash brutally into the dirt. Looking down on him from above, he had roared with crushing arrogance, "Do you see the gap now? I don't have time to waste on trash like you." In his previous life, Verokin had been a complete and utter madman. And now, Crash sincerely hoped he had not changed in the slightest. As those words ended, a sickening fire of vengeance ignited in Crash's eyes, and almost at the same moment, a dense purple aura exploded from his body. Almost simultaneously, a knight on the distant battlefield let out a shrill scream, his body twisting wildly within the erosion energy. His facial features gradually melted away, and in the end his whole face turned into a smooth and grotesque sheet of flesh. Another knight pointed at the Thousand-Faced Demon in terror. "It's a face curse." Then what they should do now was retreat from the battlefield immediately. After all, if even veteran knights struggled to resist those cursed tentacles, then charging in with a group of recruits would be nothing but suicide. Verokin, by contrast, drew his sword with a violent motion. Not only did he not retreat, he instead shot straight at the Thousand-Faced Demon wrapped in raging flames. With fire surrounding his whole body, he transformed into a burning meteor and crashed down from the air. The monster opened its mouth in a soundless shriek, but it did not even have the chance to dodge. The next moment, it was reduced to ashes within the bursting firelight, and even the ground trembled violently from the impact. Verokin stood holding his sword and roared at the retreating soldiers, "All of you, stop. I'll tear open a path." The surviving knights were dumbstruck, then immediately burst into fanatical cheers, as expected of Lord Verokin of Valheim. Verokin swept his gaze around in confusion. Where did that guy hide? Don't tell me he's already been swallowed by an erosion monster? At this moment, Crash was crouching behind a massive boulder. He had clearly seen a tear of blood slide from the corner of that monster's eye. That was not normal. In the next instant, the thousand-faced demon's body began convulsing violently, while countless blurry human faces within it twisted madly. Black slime poured from the eye sockets of those faces. Sensing the sudden change in the situation, Verokin immediately turned into a streak of fire and dove downward. The twisted faces shattered inch by inch under the impact, but a suffocating pressure spread wildly through the earth. Verokin's face turned ghastly. This overwhelming evil aura, it has to be cut down before it mutates completely. He raised his flaming sword high and shouted an order at the knights behind him. All units, concentrate fire. Target, the thousand-faced demon. Before his words had even finished, Verokin leapt high, and the flaming blade became a killing blow. But the anticipated kill never came. His sword was stopped in midair by an invisible darkness, while flames and the power of curses collided and emitted a piercing, shattering roar. Verokin trembled all over. Even an attack enhanced by aura had been blocked. He steadied himself and roared again. Before it mutates completely, continue attacking with full force. But this time, there was no answer from behind him. Verokin whipped around, and his face instantly turned deathly pale. Every knight behind him was standing frozen in place, motionless, as if their souls had been hollowed out. Verokin roared in fury, "We are knights of Valheim. Are you really so frightened by this tiny bit of curse?" Yet still no one answered. Those knights wore vacant expressions, like puppets under someone else's control. Only then did Verokin finally realize, it was a curse. From the very beginning, this had not been ordinary erosion. And his own arrogance had led the entire knight squad toward complete annihilation. A moment later, nothing remained in Verokin's pupils except bone-deep terror. The once unrivaled strongest direct descendant of Valheim now had nothing written on his face but despair. An intangible phantom whispered in his ear, seducing him with its curse. "Because you're an idiot. Your sister Charlotte left you far behind long ago. You're nothing but useless trash propped up by your family name. The Knight Order died because of your arrogance, and all you can think about is escaping alone. A failure like you deserves to die." As the words fell, the thousand-faced demon's foul, rotting claws pounced down. Just as those claws were about to tear Verokin apart, a faint green flash suddenly streaked past. Verokin was violently knocked away and narrowly avoided the fatal blow. He forced his eyes open. But what entered his sight was the younger brother he had always treated as the family's worthless failure. His voice was full of shock and confusion. "Why are you here?" Crash met his gaze calmly and said that he had been hiding in the dark all along, observing the battle. The moment the thousand-faced demon struck just now, he had used the opponent's obstructed line of sight to pull Verokin out of the battlefield. Verokin braced himself on the ground and tried to stand, but the moment he raised one leg, he collapsed heavily back down. Crash could not help laughing out loud, his tone openly dripping with sarcasm. "With a body like that, one that can't even condense battle aura anymore, are you sure you don't need my help, brother?" Verokin forcibly staggered to his feet, stubbornly insisting that he did not need help from worthless trash like Crash. The instant the words left his mouth, his body trembled, and he swept a horrified gaze over the rain-drenched forest. Was the thousand-faced demon still nearby? Crash's voice pressed down slowly. "It's been a long time since I brought you out, but after walking this long, we still haven't left this forest, which means the erosion field has already been completely sealed. In other words, unless we kill that monster, we are never going back." Then Crash continued, "I have an ultimate killing move that Charlotte personally taught me. The reason I was able to crush Yenix that day at the Sanctuary of Stars was because of it." Verokin's voice carried the last trace of struggle. "That move, do you really think it can kill the thousand-faced demon?" Crash answered without the slightest hesitation. "If we stay here and get eroded, we'll just end up as monster feed. Better to gamble our lives in one fight. Even if you don't trust me, you should trust Charlotte." Verokin forced out a bitter smile. "That woman Charlotte really is a genius." He drove the tip of his sword fiercely into the mud. "But if we fail, both of us will die in this cursed place." Crash slowly curved his lips into a smile. "I guarantee it, we'll both leave here alive." The scene shifted back to the Grillic Mountains, where the oppressive presence of the thousand-faced demon was drawing closer step by step. The cold curse-laden aura clung to the skin with the rain, and Crash's voice tightened as he turned to Verokin beside him and asked if he was ready. Verokin lowered his head and looked at his palm, where a cluster of flames suddenly flared up. He slowly raised his eyes, the arrogance of the past already gone. "Then let's begin." As he spoke, he temporarily entrusted part of the power of his flames to Crash. Crash took a deep breath, and blazing blue flames burst out around his body. He then closed his eyes, letting the rain slide down his jaw as he poured both his mind and his remaining strength entirely into the edge of that sword. Verokin froze completely. He had never seen anyone compress their focus to such a degree, as if everything around them had been erased into nothingness. And that pure aura wrapped around Crash was the very source of power that Verokin had never touched in his entire life. Earlier, when Crash had told him to combine the fire of Ignis with Charlotte's secret art, he had only found it laughable and taken it as the ravings of a madman. But the level Crash was now displaying was a place Verokin could never reach even if he gave everything he had. He stared at the aura burning around Crash. That flame was purer than any time he had ever invoked Ignis. This younger brother he had always treated as a failure now possessed a power that could easily crush him. Verokin was instantly swallowed by frustration. He had lost his men and fled in disgrace. If in the end it was Crash who struck down the thousand-faced demon with his sword, wouldn't that prove he was even weaker than worthless Crash? Before he could sink deeper into self-doubt, Crash had already leapt into the air, and the flaming longsword fused violently with Verokin's Ignis fire, crashing head-on into the cursed body of the thousand-faced demon. The thousand-faced demon's body was completely engulfed by flames, and that shell covered in countless human faces revealed extreme terror before finally turning to ash in the firelight. Sunlight pierced through the clouds and fell upon the charred black earth. Crash raised his head, turned toward the shattered Verokin, and indicated that the chaos of battle was over. But Verokin suddenly pulled out a savage smile, one filled entirely with jealousy, hatred, and madness from a dead end. So this is how it ends? He gripped the sword hilt so tightly that a low, sinister laugh rolled out of his throat. In the next second, he swung his sword straight at Crash's neck, and Crash immediately raised his own sword to block. But on Verokin's blade, there was not the slightest trace of Ignis's power. Verokin himself began trembling in shock, staring fixedly at the blade as his pupils shrank wildly. Why can't I use my Ignis anymore? Crash's voice was so cold it pierced through Verokin's despair. I should thank you, brother Verokin. Thank you for always being this stupid, and for never learning how to adapt. The conditions for plundering Ignis were in fact simple to the point of cruelty. First make Verokin willingly hand over part of his control, then force him to admit in his heart that someone else is stronger, and finally wait for his pride to collapse completely. In that moment, the skill would be taken away, and Crash had already made Verokin's flames entirely his own. Verokin let out a howl like a dying beast. Crash looked down at him sprawled in the mud, his tone cold as snow. I truly did want to be brothers with you once. But no matter what I did, in your eyes there was only one conclusion. I was trash for you to step on whenever you pleased. Back when you crushed my dignity with Ignis, I was on the ground just like you are now, trembling in pain. After saying that, Crash slowly raised his head and looked toward the clear sky. Today's weather is truly ironic, beautiful, as if it were celebrating some kind of festival. By the time he returned to the Valheim main house, the news that the Night Order had been wiped out had already spread. This erosion incident had been reclassified as 5-star difficulty, and the testimony Crash fabricated became the truth everyone accepted by default. Verokin had died heroically while covering Crash's retreat and had ultimately given his life to shatter the thousand-faced demon, preserving the last honor of Valheim. Crash leaned outside the door, watching this absurd play with cold eyes. On this expedition, he had gained more than he had expected. He had already completely adapted to the environment of extreme blood poison. His sixth sense was also now able, to a certain extent, to suppress erosion going out of control. And the stolen Ignis, fused with the power of erosion, had given him mastery over black flames powerful enough to destroy everything. The only hidden danger left was the investigation into the anomaly at the erosion site. They still had not uncovered the truth. But the root of the truth came from world erosion itself. The main body of the eroder had long since sunk into an eternal dream and could only observe the world through the eyes of its minions. And once the Undying One's minions began to act, it meant that Crash had been targeted even earlier than expected. Crash raised his hand and lightly knocked on the door in front of him. The moment the door opened, Crash's pupils contracted sharply. Standing before him was a Level 4 investigator from the Erosion Investigation Bureau, Sapphira. The star-shaped mark on her neck pierced straight into Crash's eyes. He suddenly recalled a fragment of memory from his previous life. At that time, under Arthur's orders, he had tried to steal August's undying origin. The result had been total failure. The many clone projections he had created were nothing more than a smokescreen because his true body had been bound by a curse and could not move an inch. Even if he had been given another chance, success would still have been impossible, because the unlocking condition for stealing the undying origin was to become a being more powerful than the Undying One, August. Crash slowly curved his lips into a confident smile and began negotiating. Undying One, I will personally erase your mark of immortality for you. Sapphira tilted her head slightly, and the confusion on her face vanished in an instant, replaced by a strange smile that seemed to see through everything. Her figure gradually melted into the darkness behind her. So you're the returner? I was originally looking for something else, but I didn't expect to stumble upon such a great surprise. Crash's brows tightened. On what basis was she so certain he was a returner? Sapphire's smile twisted even further. Ordinary people would never dare negotiate with a being like her. Only returners trapped in a time loop had this kind of foolishly adorable audacity. She was a being that transcended time, deathless and undying. It was impossible for Crash to kill her, so he should stop trying to amuse her with such clumsy lies. But Crash did not retreat. He said this was no lie, because his power was called steal. He could not only steal skills, he could also take her immortal power along with them. For the first time, a flash of shock passed through Sapphira's eyes. Crash clenched his fists until his knuckles cracked. For hundreds of years, you've been raising the level of erosion and casting your projections all over the world, just like this investigator Sapphire right now. What you want is someone who can truly kill you. And now, the one who can steal away your immortal curse is standing right in front of you. Sapphira did not hesitate for long before asking in a low voice, "Your condition? Help me become stronger. My skill can only activate when I'm stronger than you, so let me become your disciple." Sapphira's pupils shrank sharply, and then she burst into wild laughter. She slowly extended a hand, Prankton power coiling around her palm, and declared that she would definitely forge Crash into the most perfect powerhouse in the world. In the next instant, an invisible pressure crashed down, forcing Crash back several steps. Even just August's projection had an aura this overwhelming. The Master of the Crimson Court had once stood on equal footing with Arthur, yet also commanded countless erosion legions. As long as he gained that being's help, Crash could become even stronger. Even if it meant borrowing the power of an invader, he would still drag this world back from the brink of destruction. But a skill was unique in all the world and could only be possessed by one person for an entire lifetime. By that rule, Arthur's return had ultimately returned to Crash in this life as well. This meant he could no longer reset the timeline by will alone. If the world was destroyed again, he would turn to dust with it, and there would be no second chance. A trace of relief surfaced on Crash's face. "I'm glad you can stay with me, August." More than that, Sapphira was curious why Crash was not living at the Valheim main house. Crash's voice was completely calm. He had not come here for years and had nearly forgotten what his parents even looked like. At that moment, a maid with her face hidden under a hood appeared in the center of the hall and said that Lady Crelia wished to see Crash. Crash's gaze instantly froze. Mother? During all the years he had lived at Green Pine Manor, she had never once appeared, not even sent a single letter. Now that she was suddenly summoning him, it was most likely because she had heard the rumors that he had defeated Yennex and slain the thousand-faced demon with the expedition, and had finally developed interest in this worthless son. The maid nodded slowly. Additionally, the family head as well. After he returns from the Forbidden Land, he intends to meet you personally. That family ruler who had already stepped into the realm of demigods had perhaps sensed, through the power of the stars, the surging strength inside Crash and the abnormal fluctuations of his soul. The maid continued, "Therefore, Lady Crelia hopes that before then, you will not leave the main family estate." But Bianca was still waiting for him at Green Pine Manor. Crash turned and walked away. "This is not an order personally given by father. In that case, I'm going back first." The maid stared in astonishment at his departing back, clearly not expecting anyone to dare disobey the lady of the house. Crash walked out of the hall without even turning his head. "When father truly wants to see me, I'll come back. Or else, he'll come to me himself." The carriage on the return trip quickly arrived back at Green Pine Manor. Before getting off, Crash instructed Sapphira, who had taken the form of a crow, "There's a purple-haired girl inside. Be friendly to her from now on." At the same time, Bianca was holding a book tightly in her arms, as if she had rushed over to greet him the moment she heard the news from the library. Crash lowered his head to look at her, and a faint smile rose at the corner of his lips. "See, I told you long ago that I would come back on time." At that moment, Arioto handed over a letter, saying it had come from young Master Damferlion. The letter read, "The medicine Crash had commissioned for fading disease had been completed." Crash handed the letter back to Arioto. "When Damferlion arrives at Green Pine Manor, give him the highest level of hospitality. He will be your benefactor." Arioto changed the subject and said that Bianca had been worrying about Crash the whole time. As soon as she heard that he had gone into an erosion zone, she immediately had a carriage prepared and planned to go personally to the main estate to visit him once the operation was over. Fortunately, they had stopped her in advance. Otherwise, it would have been far too dangerous for a little girl to enter the main house alone. A sharp look flashed through Crash's eyes. He had not checked Bianca's curse in some time. In the next second, purple demonic energy erupted violently and instantly enveloped the entire Green Pine Manor. At the same time, the system displayed a prompt. The first unlocking condition had been fulfilled. Crash Valheim had successfully become Bianca's friend. Unexpectedly, Bianca's first cursed shackle had broken at this very moment. that meant only the final restriction remained. Afterward, Crash introduced August's identity to Bianca, saying this was a new member soon to join Green Pine Manor. Only then did he realize Bianca actually liked soft little animals this much. What had to be done next was to remove the second restriction, become the person Bianca treasured most. But that condition was too vague. For a person, most treasured usually meant family, child, friend, or lover. And since Crash was already Bianca's fiancé, becoming her lover was actually the most likely route. This also gave him a warning. Before the return, stealing curses had never required such a troublesome process. But on further thought, it made sense. Everyone's path in this life had already been rewritten. A short while later, Crash appeared at the training grounds. During this time, he had come to understand a cruel truth. He could rely on monstrous willpower and the experience of his previous life to barely make up for the gap in talent. But 5 years later, when the true geniuses had also accumulated enough experience, he might not even be able to catch up to them. Even Yennex, whom he had easily suppressed at the Sanctuary of Stars, might be someone Crash could no longer keep up with by the time they turned 20. But if August only cared about talent, he would never have accepted Crash as a disciple. In his eyes, a skill that could take everything meant talent itself could simply be stolen. He would make Crash, who had crawled on the ground his whole life, soar into the sky. And once Crash stood above the clouds, he would take away his undying body as well. The next day arrived, and Danforlion came to Green Pine Manor as promised. Before Crash could even speak, Danforlion grinned and slowly took a small crystal bottle out of his bag. He shook the bottle. "The thing you asked me for is done. So, what do you think? Does that make me an alchemy genius?" Faced with his half-joking tone, Crash almost answered without thinking. "You were a genius to begin with." That unexpected reply made Danforlion's expression stiffen. He had not expected Crash's praise to be so direct. People thought geniuses were everywhere because so many reached the top in their own fields. But only Crash knew. True geniuses had always been rare. He had once lived a lifetime among the top geniuses gathered in the Azure generation, and refusing to acknowledge another person's excellence would only make oneself seem narrow and ridiculous, so he had always admitted genius frankly. Afterward, Crash learned about Yannex's recent situation from Danforlion. After being crushed by Charlotte, he had completely abandoned training. To be precise, he had lost the meaning of training. He had long believed that no matter how hard he struggled, he could never reach Charlotte's height. But when he saw with his own eyes the family's Crash rise at the Sanctuary of Stars, something inside him finally cracked. The only thing certain was this: Yennex had started training like mad, at an intensity far beyond before. Crash's tone was full of contempt, a meaningless struggle. To him, Yennex was only a traitor who had betrayed his word. However much Yennex wavered had nothing to do with Crash. Just then, a voice sounded in Crash's mind. This unsettling kind of mental transmission was something only August, the immortal of the Crimson Cord, would use. August had not expected that besides Valheim, the Kingdom of Starin actually had such a useful chess piece hidden away. Those crow-like crimson vertical pupils glimmered faintly. With a single glance, he saw through Danforlion's talent and found him perfect for refining spirit elixirs. Spirit elixirs were forbidden secret medicines capable of greatly strengthening the flesh and battle aura. They were extremely expensive and were usually handed down among upper nobility as family recipes. But the moment August spoke, he was talking about refining spirit elixirs. Even with Danforlion's exceptional talent, it was absolutely impossible to make them casually on the spot. Yet August said he had already completely analyzed the formula, and as long as the alchemist had enough experience, it could be done. Hearing the word spirit medicine, Danforlion suddenly laughed lightly. Was Crash planning to forcefully raise his power through spirit medicine, or had Yannex's mad training provoked him? After saying that, he silently looked at Crash. In truth, he did not know much about what Crash had gone through, but his own reputation in the alchemy world had long since spread, so such a request was not unreasonable. Then Crash recited the formula August had provided word for word. The more Danforlion listened, the more serious he became. He had never even imagined spirit medicine formulas like these. He repeatedly deduced them in his mind, first with confusion. Then his expression abruptly changed into shock as he pressed Crash on where he had learned them. Crash casually made up an excuse, saying these were secret formulas passed down within the Valheim family. Danforlion's eyes immediately lit up, but he also spoke frankly. There were several materials among them that even he could not get, especially white snow scorchin fungus and golden dragon grass. White snow scorchin fungus mainly grew in the northern territory of the Hardenhearts family. The mountain ranges there were dangerous, and medicine merchants from the kingdom had a hard time obtaining stock. But with Bianca's help, getting it should not be difficult. Then Danforlion raised another issue. As for golden dragon grass, you should know. It's an imperial specialty. The Empire controls it directly, and there are no channels to sell it within Starin. Even through the black market, you'd still have to watch out for imperial people. Danforlion, however, did not think it troublesome. The Empire would soon hold 2 martial tournaments, an adult division and a youth division for those under 15. What the Empire truly wanted was the youth division, because the rewards were richer. As long as one placed in the top 3, one could obtain golden dragon grass. Crash understood very well the Empire's real purpose in organizing the tournament, to expand Laren Academy's talent reserves. On the surface, it was reconciliation between kingdom and empire, but in reality, it was a struggle for influence. The more of their own people they inserted, the more power they would hold within the academy. Therefore, if Crash entered under the identity of a direct Valheim descendant, he would inevitably throw the entire situation into chaos. When Danforlion heard this, his eyes lit up at once, and he immediately pulled a bottle of potion from his clothes, saying that this thing could directly alter the appearance of whoever drank it. But what Crash had not expected was that the potion's true effect was actually to change one's sex. At the public training grounds the next day, Crash stood still with a longsword in hand, eyes closed before August. He had not closed his eyes to abandon perception, but to awaken the body's 6th sense through a secret art. With that perception, he sought to capture every slight disturbance, the deviation of airflow, the vibration of energy, even the fluctuations of the opponent's intent. Although the current Crash was still only a beginner, in the next instant, the shadow of his sword actually predicted August's trajectory of movement before the attack had even taken shape. August's laughter fell from overhead as she admitted that Crash's so-called 6th sense really was somewhat interesting. The experience from countless past life and death battles, combined with this half-mastered secret art, had truly allowed Crash's swordsmanship to touch the threshold. And that threshold, as he called it, was the dull sword. Push the 6th sense to its limit, read the opponent's intent first, and then move one step ahead to seal off every possible path of attack. Though this swordsmanship looked slow, it actually kept the whole situation firmly in hand, so uncanny that it nearly approached the realm of precognition. Last night, Danforlion had also explained it to Crash. This was an extremely rare transformation potion. Its effects could last an entire week, and as his latest improved special version, it would basically not be detected by any magical inspection, nor would it be judged as a prohibited stimulant. When the time came, Crash only needed to register for the tournament as an ordinary commoner from the Kingdom of Starin. The only thing that left him speechless was this: the disguised appearance would be generated automatically according to the user's innermost personality. According to the plan, today was the day to set out for the martial tournament. Arioto had already been waiting in front of the carriage for quite some time. Crash suddenly remembered the day Danforlion had delivered the medicine for fading disease. He had handed the antidote to Arioto on the spot. At first, Arioto had been full of confusion, but the moment he heard it was the miracle medicine that could save his daughter, he dropped to his knees with a thud. Already past 50, he cried so hard that no sound came out, and could only thank Crash over and over again. He loved his daughter to the extreme, and for the sake of curing her illness, he had even once considered betraying his master's house. At the time, Crash had only said a few calm words. "It was I who saved your daughter's life. So, Arioto, until you have my permission, you are not allowed to die. That is my only condition for you." From that moment on, Arioto regarded Crash as the master to whom he would devote his life. And Crash could finally erase from his memory the image of Arioto being poisoned to death in his previous life. Healing his daughter had not only been to win loyalty, but also to make up for the regret of the past. That wound split open by his first betrayal had also eased somewhat at this moment. As for Bianca, at Crash's request, she had returned to the Hardenhearts family in the Northern Territories to retrieve one of the materials Danforlion needed: white snow scorched and fungus. 3 days later, Crash and his group left the Kingdom of Starin. The female merchant guiding them clearly traveled between nations year-round, and the route she chose was clean and efficient, almost perfectly avoiding all erosion zones. Following August's advice, Crash used the entire journey for training, planning to absorb the erosion energy along the road on the return trip instead. With that in mind, his training actually became more relaxed and more stable. At that moment, a group of bandits suddenly blocked the female merchant in the middle of the road. The vulgar teasing in their voices made it clear they were brigands entrenched in lawless territory. Just as several of them were about to get their way, a sharp sound split the air. Crash's thrown dagger flew in a straight line and instantly pierced through one man's skull. The bandit leader, Oral, reacted the fastest. With one cold glance, he immediately realized that Crash was no ordinary boy. In the next moment, he chopped toward Crash's vital points like lightning, and Crash instinctively raised his sword to block. An immense force crashed down, shaking Crash into the air and sending him sliding back several steps. Contempt flashed through Oral's eyes. It seemed Crash had only been able to kill his subordinate in one strike by catching him off guard. And Crash's next movements only made Oral more certain of that judgment. Because Crash's swordsmanship was absurdly slow, so slow that Oral could not understand how such speed could possibly stop his fierce assault. Crash said nothing, using only that seemingly sluggish rhythm to precisely seal off every lethal path his opponent could take. Oral even developed a strange illusion. It was not him attacking, but Crash dragging his axe along and forcing him to crash into that sword himself. Oral could no longer hold back and prepared to use his ultimate trump card. But in the next second, what greeted him was Crash's icy voice, cold enough to cut to the bone. "What you're using is an imperial forbidden art. So you're a lackey of the wanted criminal Beckman?" Memories from his previous life instantly flooded Crash's mind. The village massacre that had once shaken the Empire. A man called Dogslayer had slaughtered an entire village by himself. That man had accepted the power of a world eroder and become an erosion servant, just like Bianca, the future White Devil who would be controlled by a curse, becoming a minion dependent on erosion and bringing calamity upon the world. Dogslayer would eventually infiltrate the kingdom of Starin, and in the end he would be personally captured by Charlotte. That was also the key achievement that made Charlotte famous in her youth and shook the Empire. At 16, she defeated that erosion servant by herself. Looking at the panicked Oral before him, Crash frowned slightly, and the aura around him turned instantly colder. The instant confusion rose in Aura's eyes, his massive body slowly fell. Since Dogslayer would die at Charlotte's hands anyway, there was no need to waste attention on underlings like these. What mattered most now was getting into the tournament and obtaining the Golden Dragon Grass as quickly as possible, because Beckman's appearance had come far earlier than it had in the previous life. 2 days later, at the reception area of the Aphania Empire Martial Tournament, contestants from all over had packed the place so tightly it was impossible to move. The grand event organized by the Empire naturally drew the attention of every faction. At the same time, a clear voice rang out from the second floor. "So many interesting children gathered together. This is too fun." Crash looked up and saw a young girl lazily leaning over the railing, radiating an air of pure innocence. The Empire's fourth princess, Laura Aphania. Crash had long heard rumors about this imperial princess. If he remembered correctly, she had just turned 14 this year and was the youngest princess in the Empire. Despite her age, she possessed astonishing intelligence, having solved a problem at 7 years old that had troubled imperial mathematicians for years. But her flaws were equally well known. She was mischievous and willful, like a child who would never grow up. Coupled with the fact that she had been weak and frail from birth, unable to withstand the cruelty of the struggle for imperial power, she had deliberately acted as though she had no proper ambitions, using that as a way to avoid the succession battle. A sly smile curled at Laura's lips. "These delicious-looking little things, I'll pick them out one by one, send them all into Laren Academy, and then they'll obediently become my prey." In the next second, Laura's gaze suddenly locked onto Crash, forcing him to instinctively rein in his aura. Laura's tone was playful. For some reason, he has a very strong smell of villainy around him, exactly like the standard type from the Empire's archenemy, the Valheim family. After obtaining the registration documents, Crash quickly walked out of the reception hall. Written on them was the identity he had forged, named Daniel, age 11, from the imperial frontier town of Ojivan. Now only one goal remained, the Golden Dragon Grass. This spirit herb was the key ingredient August had specifically named, and it was also Crash's bargaining chip for strengthening his body and compensating for his weaknesses. For the qualifying rounds 2 days later, he had to find lodging and adjust his condition as soon as possible. But reality soon dealt Crash a heavy blow. After rushing from inn to inn, every answer he got was the same, fully booked. Martial contestants and spectators had packed the entire city, and even tiny inns tucked away in remote alleys were hanging signs saying no vacancies. Sleeping outdoors for one night would have been manageable, but there was still at least a week until after the finals. Sleeping on the streets every day would not only be miserable, but also make it easier for his identity to be exposed. Just as Crash frowned, a gentle voice sounded by his ear. He looked up and saw a white-haired old woman standing before him, wearing a kindly smile. "You're a young man here for the tournament, aren't you? If you don't mind, my house happens to have an empty room." Crash did not hesitate and agreed on the spot, saying he was willing to stay there temporarily. On the way, August crouched on Crash's shoulder and let out a low mocking laugh. "Didn't they teach you when you were little? Don't go with strangers." Crash could not be bothered with her. In his previous life, fighting erosion, he had spent more than enough nights sleeping on roadsides. Having a place to stay was better than exposing himself to unknown dangers. Besides, the old woman's aura was peaceful and carried no malice at all. Then, at the old grandmother's indication, Crash carried his luggage upstairs to the second floor, and at that very moment, a familiar figure appeared before him. The instant he recognized the person, Crash's body stiffened abruptly. It was none other than that mischievous fourth princess of the Empire, Laura. Almost no one outside the palace knew what she looked like, so she must have been sure no one would recognize her, which was why she dared to openly mix among the commoner district. Crash understood at once. No wonder the old woman had taken him in so willingly. He had probably been followed by Laura ever since he left the registration hall. He had simply not expected her to lead him here so quietly and without his noticing. Who would have thought that the useless young master of the Valheim family would begin a life of cohabitation with the Empire's fourth princess? What chilled Crash even more was that Laura not only voluntarily gave her name, but also exposed his true identity in a single breath. Although the Empire and Starin used the same language, people from Starin pronounced plosive sounds slightly more heavily. Even though Crash had deliberately mixed in the habits of imperial pronunciation, that basic nature could not be changed. While Crash was downstairs eating, Laura and her maid Sarah quietly plodded to one side. "You said he already saw through your identity. What exactly do you mean by that?" "Exactly what it sounds like. The way he reacted to the details about me already proved it. He recognized me long ago." His attitude when he first met the old woman was completely different from the way he acted when he first met me. What truly matters is the premise of first meeting. People who meet for the first time should be unfamiliar with each other. But what he gave me wasn't unfamiliarity. It was the natural ease of someone meeting an acquaintance. Because of that, Laura was even more confused. She was certain this was the first time she had ever seen this boy, someone who had never appeared in her memory. So why was he treating her with such familiarity? Was he deliberately pretending closeness? But unless he was an unprecedented master swindler, it should have been impossible to fool her eyes. She rapidly worked through several possibilities in her mind, then gave a light laugh. Perhaps he really was simply a complete fraud. More than that, what concerned her was her sister Sigrun's current situation. Sarah immediately composed herself. Based on all the clues, third Princess Sigrun truly does seem like a completely different person from 1 year ago. The Empire's third princess, Sigrun Ephania, was Laura's third elder sister, an outstanding swordsmanship prodigy upon whom the entire nation had pinned its hopes, the brightest future swordswoman of the Empire. But as early as a year ago, Laura had already noticed the disturbing changes in her. Sigrun was no longer the sister she knew. Time soon reached the day of the martial tournament preliminaries. The rules of the preliminaries were so crude they were practically savage, 100 people per group in a chaotic melee, with only the top 4 of each group advancing. Under August's hellish training, opponents at this level were not a problem at all for Crash. After the preliminaries ended, Crash walked toward the resting corridor, and suddenly applause and loud laughter came from behind him. In the corner stood a strange man whose face was wrapped in bandages. He stared fixedly at Crash, and a bizarre smile seeped out through the gaps in the bandages. Crash's tone turned hard and impatient as he asked what the hell the man was screeching about. He had never shown a pleasant face to people of unknown origin. "Because an interesting companion has appeared, of course I have to laugh. If I'm not mistaken, you're one of the people sent by the assassination organization Night Crow, aren't you?" Crash's brows tightened sharply. Night Crow, the Empire's most secretive and most vicious underground assassination organization. He had not expected them to send someone to the tournament as well. Even with 2 lifetimes of memories, it would have been impossible for him to understand every hidden current in the Empire. What was more, in his previous life at Laren Academy, he had never once heard the name Night Crow. The Imperial royal family might be mad, but not mad enough to stuff an assassination organization into the academy. But in the next second, a name exploded in Crash's heart, and a chill instantly climbed his spine. Sigrun Ephania, the Empire's third princess, a returner burdened with memories of repetition just like him. Crash coldly denied it, saying he had no idea what nonsense the other man was talking about. The bandaged man's gaze immediately shifted to August. The crow on Crash's shoulder was evidence enough. Combined with Crash's dark aura, he looked exactly like someone who had crawled out of the underworld. The man grinned maliciously. "Relax, I won't expose you. After all, the power behind me is not something you can afford to offend. We're both people of the underground world, so why not look after each other?" With that, he waved and turned to leave. Crash stared at his departing back, his gaze sinking completely. Whoever this man was, he had to find out the truth. August immediately beat her wings once and landed in front of the bandaged man. In the next second, the man's whole body froze and his eyes instantly turned hollow. August's tone was helpless. "It's only low-level hypnosis. Now whatever I ask, he'll answer." The bandaged man turned his head blankly, clearly already under complete control. His tone was flat, yet he dropped a piece of news that shook Crash deeply. Night Crow had been nearly annihilated not long ago. Their recent dispatch to the martial tournament had also been ordered by a new master. The purpose was for the organization, after being destroyed, to completely submit under that new master's feet. And the one behind Night Crow's destruction was none other than the Empire's second prince. Crash was utterly confused. This was almost certainly a rumor someone had deliberately released. The second prince could not possibly have the ability to swallow an assassination organization like Night Crow. What was more, the true nature of Night Crow was far more complicated than it looked on the surface. Crash clearly remembered that this so-called famed assassin house was actually the shadow of the imperial royal family. On the surface it drifted in the underground world, but in truth it was the royal family's claw, used specifically to deal with the Empire's dirtiest and most shameful secrets. There had even been a rumor: if one walked through the Empire's back alleys carrying a crow insignia, one could avoid harassment from underground factions. That had only been information deliberately released by the royal family, meant to raise Night Crow's intimidation value while also using it to monitor nobles connected to the underworld and keep all sides in balance. And according to memories of his previous life, the second prince's role had been to support and strengthen the first prince's faction. If the second prince was targeted and killed first, the first prince's power would instantly collapse. Crash immediately thought of the woman burdened with memories of repetition, Sigrun. Other than her, he could think of no second person capable of setting up such a scheme. This was not the ambition of the second prince at all, but a trap laid by Sigrun. As for the rumor that the second prince controls Night Crow, Sigrun was most likely the one pushing it from behind the scenes, deliberately spreading it until even the underground forces believed it. Crash lowered his head in thought, the list of royal family members flashing rapidly through his mind. Sigrun's real target had never been the first prince or the second prince, but Laura Ephania, the seemingly mischievous yet genuinely brilliant fourth princess. In the previous life, the first prince had ultimately died at Sigrun's hands. Just before she was about to support Arthur onto the throne, Laura hid the white dragon imperial seal that symbolized imperial authority, and then killed herself. Without the white dragon imperial seal, one could not inherit the throne with proper legitimacy. This was an unspoken rule the Empire had followed for 1,000 years. In the end, although Sigrun and Arthur did ascend the throne by force, without the seal they could not unify the Empire and could only become rulers in name. The Empire then immediately fragmented from within and no longer had the strength to resist the spread of world erosion. Therefore, the returned Sigrun would inevitably eliminate Laura, that obstacle, in advance. And because of that, Crash absolutely could not let her succeed. But before that, he had to find the real Night Crow hidden in the finals. As the preliminaries neared their end, a bizarre piece of news spread madly through every street and alley of the capital. A member of Night Crow was lurking among the youth division. More than half the audience had come because of that rumor. They wanted to see with their own eyes whether it was true. And the pitch-black crow perched on Crash's shoulder happened to perfectly match the symbol of Night Crow. Combined with Crash's attire and aura, which looked exactly like a killer who had crawled out of the Empire's underworld, people had all but decided that he was the Night Crow contestant. In the end, Crash achieved his goal. Just as he was leaving the arena, a man stood at the end of the corridor, as if he had been waiting for him. That man's eyes were dead and cold, but the moment he saw Crash, the corners of his mouth curled slightly, his smile eerie. Is pretending to be Night Crow so amusing? In the next second, a sharp killing intent rushed at him, and a cold blade thrust straight toward Crash's throat. But Crash had already been prepared. Before the edge touched his skin, he reached back and seized the attacker's wrist. Instead of being alarmed, the man laughed. "You really do have some skill." Crash sneered in disdain. "You took the bait even faster than I expected." He shifted sideways, easily avoiding the dagger, then raised his leg and drove a brutal kick into the man's abdomen. The man staggered backward until he slammed into the corridor wall. Ignoring his panic, Crash advanced step by step. "A death art cobbled together from world erosion is useless against me. With extreme blood immersion, I can endure tricks like this easily enough." He slowly spoke a name. "Eberrosk, your heart should be in Sigrun's hands right now, shouldn't it? Let's make a deal. I'll help you get your heart back. In return, you tell me Sigrun's plan and every order she's given you." The one standing before Crash was an extraterrestrial world invader, and also a necromancer whose heart had been taken and who had been imprisoned for 1,000 years, Ebrask Benepochi. Crash still remembered their first meeting in his previous life. One day Arthur had brought her into the Azure Generation encampment and said she would be useful in the future. At first, Crash had hardly spoken to her at all, knowing only that she was the one and only necromancer in the world. Later he had understood, this so-called Night Crow was nothing more than a power built from corpses, and Ebrask was its leader. Necromancers were naturally suited to assassination, Unlike living assassins, even if they were captured, they would not reveal any information. As for the bizarre-looking man standing before Crash, he was merely one of the necromantic puppets under Ebarask's command. Afterward, following the directions given, Crash found the place where Ebarask was imprisoned. Because whether he could help her take back her heart was something she needed to verify personally. In the next moment, he activated the power of Blackwood, aiming directly at her chest, that heart which should have been beating there, but which had been taken by the Imperial royal family 1,000 years ago. In an instant, the familiar chains of theft appeared before Crash's eyes. As long as he broke those shackles, he could use Blackwood to help her reclaim her heart. But he did not act immediately, only speaking calmly. There are only two ways to break these chains. Either fulfill the harsh conditions imposed by the shackles, or receive your utterly willing permission. Only if you truly consent from the bottom of your heart to temporarily transfer your heart to me will the chains disappear. Ebarask urgently cried out that she agreed, that she gave permission. But the chains still did not move in the slightest. Crash continued explaining. Saying yes out loud isn't enough. So long as there's even the slightest reluctance in your heart, the chains won't disappear. 1,000 years of obsession meant that even if she longed for freedom, she could not instantly let down her guard. Ebarask looked utterly confused, clearly failing to grasp the key point. Crash softened his voice and painted for her the life she had always dreamed of. As long as you get your heart back, you'll be able to stay forever in this room, doing nothing at all, while your puppets handle everything for you. They'll bring you stacks of whatever books you want to read, and they'll prepare food that will never run out. You can lie down whenever you want and never again listen to anyone's orders. But if you don't get your heart back, you'll have to keep being controlled by the Empire, killing for them day after day, doing things you hate. If you truly don't want that kind of life, then sincerely hand your heart over to me. Ebarask's eyes wavered violently, and in the next moment her voice carried a desperate resolve as if burning her bridges. Then please, take my heart away. The instant those words fell, the chains of theft floating before Crash shattered and dispersed, and every restriction was fully released at that moment. And from her mouth, Crash also learned of Sigrin's next plan. Sarah Betra, the personal attendant of 4th Princess Laura Ephania, a person who personally possessed master-level strength. In Sigrin's plan, she would die at the hands of Mary Diana, the strongest spear in the Empire. Afterward, her corpse would be turned by Ebarask into a necromantic puppet, and would ultimately become the bait used to assassinate 4th Princess Laura. Not long after that very night, Sarah indeed fell beneath Mary Diana's spear. A full year had passed since returning to the past. The moment the inheritance of memories was completed, Mary had immediately rushed to the meeting point she had arranged with her close friend Sigrin. After that, the two of them went at once to find Arthur. He had personally said that he would wait in place for their return, but Arthur had disappeared, and even more strangely, Abella had vanished with him. Now the only thing Mary could do was assist 3rd Princess Sigrin and become the sharpest spear in her hand. And it was for precisely that reason that she obeyed Sigrin's order and personally killed Sarah. Soon, the time came for the grand finals of the Ephania Empire Martial Tournament. With Ebarask's assistance, Crash now had a new identity, an affiliated participant sent by the Night Crow organization. One of the first finalists to appear was Paulette, a boy from the border town of Bienchue who aspired to protect peace in the world. But Crash remembered clearly that this seemingly ordinary boy would one day become a key combat force of the Azure generation. Paulette was the first to launch an attack. With a light tap of his toes, his figure shot forward at extreme speed as if gliding across ice, his footwork light yet concealing astonishing impact. Crash recognized it at a glance. This was Paulette's self-created movement art, 10 steps across 1,000 miles, said to cross 1,000 miles in 10 steps, now fully displayed upon the arena. Immediately after, Paulette's sword edge went straight for Crash's waist, but the longsword in Crash's hand seemed to have eyes, blocking the surprise strike with perfect precision. Some things were deadlier than hard training. That was absolute understanding of one's opponent. Crash had stood behind the Azure generation's curtain. He knew these people's habits of attack better than anyone. Paulette's sword seemed to be led by invisible threads, every slash and thrust falling into Crash's predictions. This was a realm of swordsmanship beyond speed and strength. First calculate the opponent's position in space, then use that to control the rhythm. Without any surprise, Crash ultimately won the martial tournament with an overwhelming advantage that left others in despair. At this moment, in the best viewing seat in the arena, 2nd Prince Chifinafania applauded enthusiastically. What a splendid performance. He was dreaming in his heart as well. If he could use a display of Nightcrow's strength to win over the nobles, perhaps he really could sit upon the imperial throne. Just as he was immersed in his delight, orderly footsteps suddenly sounded not far away. A group of armored knights appeared at the entrance, the Imperial Black Dragon Knights, whose appearance meant only one thing: there was a criminal here. Before the second prince could react, a cold voice directly called him out by name. The speaker was Mary Diana. She had come to formally arrest the second prince on the charge of plotting the murder of fourth princess Laura Ephania. Mary's words filled Shiffon with shock. Why would he want to kill Laura? That foolish troublemaker was not even worth his effort. But Mary's tone allowed no doubt. At a Night Crow stronghold, she had found a secret order for the execution of the fourth princess, and the handwriting on it was unmistakably the second prince's. At that very moment, a mocking voice slowly sounded, and both Mary and the Black Dragon Knight stiffened slightly, because the one who had arrived was none other than the fourth princess Laura Ephania, who should have been dead, and beside her stood her attendant, Sarah Betra. Mary could not understand what she was seeing. Sarah had clearly been killed by her own hand, and according to the plan, Ebarask should have turned Sarah into a necromantic puppet, then used her to personally cut off Laura's head. Yet now Laura was completely unharmed, and Sarah was standing there perfectly alive. Laura answered with nothing more than a short, cold laugh. Mary's heart jolted, and she instantly understood. The fourth princess was known as a genius mind, and Sigrun knew that too, which was why she had made preparations in advance. If Laura saw through the plan and countered it, she would become a tremendous obstacle. As the spear aiding Sigrun, Mary had to complete her master's orders. But she had overlooked one point. After learning of Sigrun's plan, Crash had already asked August to leave an undying mark on Sarah. So no matter what happened, it was impossible for Sarah to be killed directly. A vicious glint flashed through Mary's eyes. She could not act personally now. If Sarah was alive by any means, then Ebarask had to be involved. At that thought, Mary suddenly clenched the heart belonging to Ebarask in her pocket. At that instant, Ebarask's eyes flew wide open, and she clutched her chest with both hands. Mary was issuing orders to her through the heart. Although Crash had long prepared to remove the chains, he had never used Black Hood. After all, if the heart suddenly vanished, Sigrun and Mary would immediately notice something was wrong. Therefore, Ebarask's heart was still in their hands at this moment. In the next second, countless corpses surged up from beneath her feet. The Black Dragon Knights were just about to engage, but those corpses suddenly froze as if sealed in ice, all stopping at once. Mary instantly showed panic. Ebarask, who had been collapsed on the ground and weeping moments ago, was no longer in pain and instead revealed an unervingly relaxed expression. The moment Mary hurriedly tried to grip the heart again, she realized that her pocket was already empty. Her mind began racing madly. Laura's assassination had failed, and Ebarask's heart was gone. The two incidents intertwined and instantly turned her thoughts into a knot, triggering her worst habit. Whenever something went wrong, she struck first. So she locked onto her primary target, assassinate Laura. A tremendous spiritual force exploded from Mary's body. As the strongest spear, she prepared to forcibly assassinate the Empire's fourth princess. When her spear thrust straight toward Laura's throat, a thin young boy she would never have taken seriously stepped in at that moment and forcibly blocked her full power strike. At the same time, Crash's voice slowly fell. No matter in the past or now, that simple brain of yours hasn't changed at all. Mary ultimately gave up the fight and slowly lowered her spear. The Black Dragon Knights immediately stepped forward and bound her tightly. After shattering Sigrun's scheme, Crash parted ways with Laura and the others. He then set out on the road back to the kingdom, carrying the golden dragon grass he had just obtained. Besides that, another person traveling with Crash was Ebarask, who had refused to continue serving the Empire. Meanwhile, something seemed to have happened to Bianca in the Northern Territories. Crash learned that Bianca had run into trouble. A few days earlier, a stranger named Beckman had infiltrated the Hardenhearts family, Dogslayer Beckman, the lunatic who had fled after carrying out a massacre in the Empire. And Bianca, in order to gather white snow-scorched and fungus, had gone to the very mountain region where Dogslayer was hiding, after which she completely lost contact. At the time, Bianca had returned to the Hardenhearts family in search of white snow-scorched and fungus, following Crash's instructions. Just as she had expected, the treatment she received at the main house was still terrible, but she had long since grown used to it. Because of her curse, she had become the most worthless person in the Hardenhearts family. Aside from that, there was also her elder sister, Jenica Hardenhearts. To Jenica, Bianca was the child who had been born by killing their mother, but the curse left Bianca almost incapable of feeling sadness. No matter how much hatred Jenica built up, Bianca only looked at her with that expressionless face. And because of that, Jenica hated Bianca even more. Now that Bianca had returned, Jenica naturally would not let the chance pass. Afterward, Bianca began searching for the white snow scorpion fungus that Crash had specifically asked for, but no matter how hard she looked, she could not buy it. First, there were very few people able to gather it. Second, Jenica was intercepting things behind the scenes. She had already instructed the caravans not to sell any white snow scorch and fungus to Bianca. Left with no choice, Bianca could only set out alone to climb the mountain. When Jenica learned this, she was deeply shocked. She could not understand why Bianca was trying so desperately. Since childhood, other than reading, Bianca had never shown interest in anything. She loathed this younger sister, but if Bianca died in the mountains, it would cause no small trouble for her too. After all, Bianca was the fiancée personally designated by Valheim. With that in mind, Jenica quickly caught up to Bianca, who was trudging through the snowy mountain, and promised that she would give her the white snow scorch and fungus. After hearing that, Bianca turned and followed her. If she did not have to risk herself, she would not. But at that very moment, a voice tore apart the silence between them. The one who had come was the murderous dog-slayer, Beckman. There was no choice now. The two girls could only force themselves to run toward the fissure zone. But they soon came to a stop. Jenica looked up, and in an instant she was so frightened she could not speak. Before them was a cliff that seemed to have no end. At the same time, Beckman's unhurried voice drifted from behind them. He did not seem very used to running in snow, but that was fine, since he had run into such pretty girls anyway. In the next second, Bianca grabbed Jenica without hesitation and jumped straight down into the bottomless abyss. Beckman cursed and leapt down after them. The moment Beckman jumped, his eyes widened. Because the two who had jumped first had not fallen, Bianca and Jenica were standing on a slightly jutting rock ledge. Beckman roared in rage, swung his axe, and hacked straight forward. At that moment, Bianca stepped out, seized Beckman, and together with him plunged off the cliff once more. By the time Crash and Eberask arrived at the Hardenhart's family estate, Bianca had already been missing for a full week. Meanwhile, on the other side, Bianca's luck was good. She had landed in an area where the snow lay extremely deep. Even luckier, she soon found a gigantic ancient tree that had stood for 100 years. Among its branches, she saw the white snow scorched fungus, that snow-white rare spirit herb filled with sunlight, whose warmth could be felt merely by approaching it. But as time passed, Beckman finally caught Bianca when she was alone. "Beautiful miss, you really can run. I'm tired of chasing you." He reached out, seized Bianca, and forcibly lifted her whole body into the air. The pain of her hair being yanked upward made Bianca's whole body tremble. In her haze, she seemed to see Crash's figure. The worthless young master of the Valheim family had never minded her curse, and had even occasionally shown her apology. Only at this moment did she realize that Crash had already become irreplaceably important to her. Using the last trace of strength in her body, Bianca made a voice so faint it could barely be heard. At the end of her life, she wanted to see Crash one more time. And at that very moment, a figure suddenly drove a punch into Beckman's side. "I'm sorry, Bianca. I came late." After settling Bianca properly, Crash looked straight at the mad dog Beckman. No matter who Beckman was, the winner of this battle would be Crash Valheim. In the next second, Beckman's giant axe came crashing down at Crash. In a flash, Crash's longsword moved into place and precisely blocked the heavy strike. Crash's heart sank. His intuition had almost failed to keep up with the other man's speed. Judging from aura reserves alone, this man was already at the peak of the expert level, clearly having broken through his limits after becoming an erosion minion. And Crash had only just recently reached mid-expert level. Beckman hacked out several more axe strikes in succession, and Crash's longsword swiftly moved to patch every gap. After another violent clash, Crash was overpowered, and his longsword was knocked mostly aside. Crash instantly realized, a heavy, dull sword could not completely disperse the opponent's force, and so it could not expand his range of control. In that case, then he would test pure flame power instead. The surrounding scenery suddenly twisted, and the mountain range that had just been covered in snow was in the blink of an eye engulfed in crimson. Crash recognized this as Beckman's unique secret art, phantom binding, a terrifying death art that interfered with the senses through aura. Once caught in it, before consciousness was fully lost, one's senses would be stripped away layer by layer, and the body would feel as if it were falling into endless hell. Watching Crash's senses begin to collapse, Beckman finally showed a mocking smile. He wanted to see how long this brat could hold out. But Beckman also had to admit something inwardly. The instant Crash had charged at him just now, he had truly felt danger to his bones. The opponent was only a boy, absolutely inferior in both strength and aura. He had thought he could toy with this weakling however he pleased, yet in the end he had still been forced to use this move. He raised his axe and attacked again. The illusion had blocked out pain, and Beckman's movements became fiercer than ever, axe shadows hacking in from every direction. Crash barely managed to defend, but every collision drove him back again and again. In the distance, Eberask bit her lip. Crash was the benefactor who had helped her reclaim her heart, even if it had only been a deal. She still had her own bottom line. She did not want to watch Crash die helplessly, but if she intervened, she would be noticed by the Mad Hound behind Beckman. The Mad Hound was an extremely powerful being under the command of the Eroder. Once it locked onto prey, it would never stop. Yet August told her not to interfere. Trust the child who helped you reclaim your heart. That was the lone walker acknowledged by the master of the Crimson Court. At this moment, Crash was gasping hard. Forcing his sixth sense beyond its limits made the veins on his forehead bulge violently. This was the first time he had ever pushed it this far. He was the weaker one, with no confidence of crushing others through talent, and he simply could not use raw power to overwhelm people the way geniuses could. So he could only wait for the instant when the opponent fully relaxed, when the opponent believed victory was already assured, and only then drive his hidden trump card straight through in one strike. And in that very instant, Crash's sixth sense reached its limit. Flames suddenly ignited within his body, and the power of erosion inside him was completely set ablaze. He even felt as if the world had briefly come to a halt as scorching heat erupted outward and instantly tore Phantom Binding apart. This was the killer move he had kept hidden, his own original technique, created by fusing Ignis with extreme blood immersion. Crash's figure flashed and charged straight forward against the line of Beckman's axe blade. Until the longsword neared his throat, Beckman remained completely unaware. Crash's speed had reached an extreme. Only in the next second did Beckman belatedly catch sight of that deadly sword. But he was, after all, an experienced hunter, and in an instant he blasted a shockwave from his mouth, forcibly knocking Crash's aim off course. The longsword shifted and plunged brutally into Beckman's right shoulder. At the same time, the flames around Crash began to fade. That move could last no more than 3 seconds. The battle turned in an instant, and during the severe pain, Beckman swung his axe toward Crash. Crash immediately released the sword in his right hand and poured all the remaining flame of erosion into that palm. Then he raised his right arm and met Beckman's axe blade head-on without hesitation. Without surprise, his right hand was severed on the spot. But in that single instant, the right arm pierced through by the axe bought Crash several seconds of life. In that desperate situation, blue flames ignited in Crash's eyes, and his spirit entered the realm of unity between man and sword. That immense mental power was enough to make even August, who watched from the side, take notice. At that moment, the longsword embedded in Beckman's shoulder became completely linked to Crash's will. Despair appeared on Beckman's face. Even a butcher like Dogslayer could not endure pressure like this. In the next second, that longsword cut down from Beckman's shoulder and split him in two, and Crash, utterly exhausted, fell completely unconscious. A short while later, Crash stared blankly at the unfamiliar ceiling, having forgotten the last time he had suffered pain like this. Then he saw a head of snow-white hair lying beside the bed. Crash quietly looked at Bianca and spoke first, asking her why she had gone alone into the deep mountains. The Loker Mountains were dangerous enough in terrain, not to mention the snow-covered region controlled year-round by hardened hearts. Bianca slowly answered that it was because she had to obtain white snow skorks and fungus. Crash let out a helpless sigh. Should he scold her, or praise her? Bianca continued, saying that as she looked at Crash's empty sleeve, she felt responsibility there. But it was only a pure sense of responsibility. Because of it, she could not show an expression, could not cry, and her face would not grow warm with embarrassment. Even though Crash had become like this to save her, she still could not feel emotion. This was the first time she had so clearly experienced the torment of that fact. As she spoke, Bianca shook her head in pain. She was afraid that her curse would hurt the people she treasured around her. She did not want Crash to lose his emotions, and she did not want him to become like her. She knew that this thought was contradictory, but she could find no other way to express it. As she remained trapped in that conflict, Crash's calm voice slowly fell. Don't worry, Bianca. A great curse won't affect anyone who isn't its designated target. Even if I accept your curse, my emotions won't disappear. Don't forget, the young master of the Valheim family is an expert at handling curses. Hearing this, Bianca slowly raised her head. Then, at least in this moment, make this damned expressionlessness disappear. She wanted to smile and thank Crash for pulling her back from despair again and again. She also wanted to be angry at herself, because through stupidity and stubbornness she had made Crash pay the price of losing an arm. At this moment, the emotions in Bianca's heart were surging so violently that even the curse could no longer suppress them, and she asked Crash to help her regain her emotions. The system immediately displayed a prompt window. The second cursed shackle had been successfully removed. Crash Valheim had successfully become the person Bianca treasured most. Early the next morning, Bianca was called away to attend a family meeting of the Hardenhearts household. Meanwhile, Crash lowered his head and looked at his right arm during the lull. It was empty, and he had long since lost all sensation there. August brought up the promise Crash had once made, to become the strongest, and then take the power of immortality from her. But now that Crash had lost his right arm, That promise seemed impossible to fulfill. Crash's tone remained calm, as if he did not care about the severed arm at all. August, don't be angry. I know how to restore this arm. Under normal circumstances, all he had to do was make a trip to the Holy Kingdom. The Holy Kingdom of Freeman, one of the 4 great kingdoms, was said to be home to a legendary saintess who could bring the dead back to life. But the current Crash had no standing to borrow the saintess's power, even though his treatment within the family had improved recently. In Valheim's eyes he was still only a half-baked failure. Valheim would never spend a fortune on someone with no value. At most, they would hire an ordinary priest to pray for him. Crash then frankly revealed his real plan. Since his right hand was gone, he would replace it with the best one. And right now, there was someone who could do exactly that. As the only necromancer in the world, Eberask was an expert in corpse-manipulating sorcery. To her, attaching an arm for Crash was not difficult at all. He was not sure what conditions she would ask for, but the most important thing now was to get a hand back first. And Crash's primary target was that very name, Sword Demon. The moment she heard that name, August's body stiffened sharply. Sword Demon, the powerhouse who had once made the entire world tremble. His draw slash was so fast that no one in the world could keep up with the trajectory of his blade. More importantly, Sword Demon had once been August's most treasured servant. Crash knew that August's obsession with her subordinates ran deep. To August, her subordinates were the only window through which she observed the world. So she always poured emotion into them. No matter how much she knew it would hurt, she could not stop. Crash remembered Arthur saying in his previous life that there was a way to find August's true body. Capture one of her subordinates and interrogate them. Once August became aware of it, in order to protect that subordinate, she would voluntarily reveal the location of her true body. At this moment, August's voice carried a faint tremor that was hard to notice as she said Sword Demon had long since died. Crash pushed back immediately. But his swordsmanship didn't die, and you know that better than anyone. If I can get Sword Demon's arm, I can bring his swordsmanship back into the world. August fell silent at those words. Then she folded her wings and glared at Crash. You damn child, do you think you can just spout nonsense and profit from it? If that's the case, wait 2 more days. In the end, August still agreed. At the same time, inside the Hardenhearts family meeting room, the eldest son Melio, acting as temporary head, proposed that the fiancé tied to the marriage alliance with the Valheim family should be changed to Jenica. Bianca's brows drew together slightly, and for the first time a clear displeasure appeared on her face. In a firm tone, she said she disagreed. Melio's expression darkened at once. This is a major family matter, Bianca. Don't act like a child and be willful. But Bianca did not yield an inch. She was a child to begin with, before and now, so of course she could frankly say what she wanted. She looked straight at Melio. The only identity she wanted to protect was being Crash Valheim's fiancé. Melio was enraged by her stubbornness. The young master of the Valheim family has already shown terrifying bloodline power and will surely hold an important position in the kingdom of Starin in the future. You cursed child will be cast aside by him without mercy sooner or later. Jenica was stunned on the spot by how cruel those words were. But Bianca did not even let her eyelashes tremble. This is father's, brother's, and sister's home. It has never belonged to me, Bianca. So even if I am driven out of the family, I will not give up being Crash's fiancé. Melio was trembling with rage and was about to rebuke her sharply. But Crash's cold voice suddenly cut in, interrupting the meeting directly. My apologies, brother Melio. I have no intention for the time being of changing the person bound by the engagement. And regarding my killing of Dogslayer Beckman in the Hardenhearts family lands, there are 2 ways to present it. The first version, Crash Valheim stood up to protect his fiancée and shielded Bianca even after losing an arm and being gravely injured. That is the best possible story for Hardenhearts. Enough to prove I value this engagement and making the alliance between our 2 families even more stable. The second version, Hardenheart's defenses suffered a fatal lapse, allowing Dogslayer to invade easily and nearly kill a direct bloodline member of Valheim. That would be the worst-case outcome. The world would question Hardenheart's security, and at worst, the marriage alliance would collapse outright. You are the acting head, so you should understand which version to choose. Melio simply put away his anger and directly asked what Crash's conditions were. Crash slowly turned to look at Bianca beside him. Very simple. Follow Bianca's wishes. Whether the engagement continues or not should be decided by her. Seeing Bianca stand firmly behind Crash with unwavering eyes, Melio instead felt puzzled. Can you really stay by cursed Bianca's side forever? Crash's tone was as light as if he were stating a fact. You know nothing about your own family. As for the curse, I never cared about it from the beginning. After saying that, he paused again. There's one more thing. I hope you'll announce to the outside world that my severed arm was healed by a priest invited by the Hardenhearts family. If you're uneasy, then wait until you witness the arm being restored with your own eyes before reporting to Valheim. After watching them leave, Melio turned to Jenica and asked if she felt the same thing. They could actually sense emotion changing within Bianca. 2 days later, Crash stood in the training square of the Hardenhearts family, adapting to his body after losing his arm. He poured all his strength and aura into his left arm while simultaneously activating his aura and extreme blood immersion, forcing the two powers to violently collide and fuse at the single arm point. Because of that, his one-handed push-ups were absurdly slow, and every rise exhausted his whole focus. He cursed inwardly. This torment was all for the sake of grasping the essence of the single sword secret art, then completely fusing it with Sword Demon's sheath draw technique. To do that, he had to precisely focus both aura and extreme blood immersion onto a single point. But clearly, the progress at present was not noticeable. Crash had never expected to ascend to mastery in one step. He had never been a talent-based cultivator to begin with. Being able to create extinguishing flame erosion was almost already a miracle. No matter how much he pushed himself, the fact that he lacked talent had never changed. Still, he had figured out one hidden blind spot of extinguishing flame erosion. It used Ignis to ignite the erosion power inside his body and forcibly break through his physical limits. But its fatal flaw was that his body temperature shot to an extreme in an instant. The moment the power stopped, his body would collapse outright. This shortcoming was currently his greatest weak point. And because of that, Crash developed a new idea. If he could precisely control the heat within his body after activating extinguishing flame erosion, he could prolong the duration of the power and slow the rate of collapse. Thus his next target also became clear. The Moonshade limb, a special limb naturally containing the power of the moon, which would be perfect for suppressing the violent high temperature of extinguishing flame erosion. But that was a secret art of the Fire Emperor Igri, so he could only wait until the wound from his severed arm had nearly recovered before making plans for it. When the agreed time arrived, Crash followed August into a dense forest near the Hardenhearts domain. He stopped before an ancient tree and raised his hand to knock lightly on the trunk. Eber asked. As soon as he spoke, the surface of the trunk slowly split apart, and with a creaking sound, a tree door opened. Standing at the entrance was a woman dressed as a maid, who immediately bowed respectfully upon seeing Crash. "Welcome, Lord Crash. My master is waiting inside the tree." Her name was Number 8, one of the corpse servants controlled by Eberask. Led by Eberask, Crash saw an old, scarred severed arm placed upon an operating table. Eberask explained that the operation would require reconnecting the nerves. Could Crash endure it? If not, she could first put him into a sleep state. She raised a hand, signaling Number 8 to bring over an iron hammer. Crash raised an eyebrow. "No need for nonsense. Just start. I'm already used to pain." Eberask's tone also turned cold. "Fine. Once the operation begins, I will not stop out of pity." Then, at her signal, Number 8 fitted the cut end of Crash's severed arm precisely together with Sword Demon's arm. It was just that Sword Demon's arm came from his old age, so its size did not match Crash's build, but Eberask said that was not a problem. In the next second, Eberask placed her palm over the joint. In an instant, Crash felt flesh that had long since healed being torn back open by force. He clamped the cloth in his mouth with his teeth, and even though the curse had long made him numb to pain, this ripping agony still made his whole body tremble. Eberask let out a low shout, activated her secret art with her fingertips, and began reconnecting the two sets of nerves. Crash's consciousness nearly scattered, but fortunately the extreme pain soon subsided and gradually turned into a burning ache he could endure. A short while later, Crash raised his right arm. Sword Demon's arm moved as steadily as if it had always grown naturally from his body. Next he settled his mind and finally adjusted the rhythm of his aura flow. Several breaths later, the disturbance gradually quieted, and the bulging veins slowly calmed as well. It seemed extreme blood immersion had already rooted itself stably within Sword Demon's arm. That was the very reason Crash had insisted on remaining awake. If the grafting had been completed while he was unconscious, then without the restraint of his will, once Sword Demon's arm absorbed extreme blood immersion, it would definitely go berserk. He could not afford to waste the arm he had finally obtained. To one side, Eberask secretly let out a breath of relief as well. It seemed her necromantic magic had not rusted. As for August, she proposed that since it felt just like a naturally grown arm, they should go test Sword Demon's swordsmanship, and Crash naturally welcomed that. August turned to ask Eberask whether there was a sparring ground nearby. Eberask turned her head aside and refused haughtily, saying she was no one's lackey. August casually threw out a bargaining chip. That manual of combat techniques was currently in her possession. Eberask's eyes lit up instantly, and without a second thought she ordered Number 8, take him to the training ground. On the way, August asked Crash how much he knew about Sword Demon's drawslash. Crash answered honestly, Almost nothing, other than that it was unrivaled in the world. August spoke in disdain. He called himself a returner, yet dared ask for Sword Demon's arm without even knowing this much. Crash shrugged indifferently. Who could have predicted their own rebirth? Sword Demon had died before Crash was even born, so how could he possibly understand someone who had died before his own birth? August lightly pecked Crash on the forehead with her sharp beak. No matter what, she truly wanted Crash to become stronger. Then she began to explain in a serious tone. Sword Demon's swordsmanship looked similar to the single sword path Crash cultivated, but their cores were worlds apart. An ordinary swordsman poured aura into the sheath sword, then drew and slashed at extreme speed. This was a fast sword born for ambush. But Sword Demon walked another path. He finely divided the aura inside his body, gave it elasticity, then triggered tiny explosive bursts of aura inside the sheath, turning it into fine particles that collided madly within the scabbard. Not only did the force not diminish, it instead accumulated continuously. When that aura reached its limit, the sword was drawn in an instant. The trajectory became completely different, not only striking the throat first but carrying explosive destructive power capable of killing in one blow. The entire process existed only to set up that single slash. And because Crash was using Sword Demon's arm, the bodily memory of Sword Demon's lifelong training would remain fully engraved within that right arm. After listening, Crash closed his eyes and poured battle aura into the scabbard. He could feel the aura gradually developing elasticity, thanks to his own day-after-day foundation in one-sword control. But at this moment the aura was still unstable, so he slowed his rhythm and pressed his mind into the control of every thread of aura. He sank all his awareness into the sheath, focusing to the point of near suffocation as he captured the pulse of the aura. At that very moment, Sword Demon's right hand gave a faint jolt, a faint tremor, as if a sleeping instinct had finally awakened. In the next second, the long sword in Crash's hand burst from its sheath like an explosion, and his understanding of the draw technique finally took on a rough shape. Looking at Crash, Number 8 gave a calm evaluation. She could still clearly see Crash's movements when he drew the sword. Crash's heart sank. Sword Demon's draw slash should have been so fast that even an enemy's eyes could not catch it, yet Number 8 could still see the action of the draw. But that was reasonable too. The top 10 numbered corpse servants under Eberask were all master-level monsters. It was not strange for their dynamic vision to capture the trajectory. Still, this result was nowhere near enough. The opponents Crash would face in the future were far stronger than masters. When training ended, Eberask also appeared at the training ground. Crash told her that he would return to Valheim today. For her, the best choice was to stay here. If she went to Valheim, she would not stay hidden for long. If Eberask could use projections like August, perhaps she might hide for a while, but she was the true body of a world eroder, and her aura was far too obvious. Besides, Valheim was home to a nest of monsters, powerful Direct Line members, his demigod-level father Baroque, and the 5 Great Elders. Most likely, they would notice her immediately. After hearing that, Eberask shuddered. She had once been captured by the Empire, and she had no desire to experience that a second time. So Crash proposed that she remain here, and that there was also something else he wanted her help with. Before long, someone called the Poison King would appear in the north, a figure among the 10 strongest in the world, and the very person who had destroyed the Hardenhearts family in the past. So all Eberask had to do was save Laska, the head of the Hardenhearts family. Eberask agreed without hesitation. Taking back her heart had been a transaction, but she had always felt grateful to Crash in her heart, so she did not struggle over this request at all. After explaining everything, Crash turned and left. Eberask said in a low voice that, in the past, she might have followed him back to Valheim. She too had once ventured through the world, but that had all been long ago. That drive had long since been worn away. This was enough for her now. She turned and walked in another direction, yet in her heart she still could not help worrying. Given Crash's way of doing things, he would definitely become entangled with more eroders in the future, and among them there would very likely be truly dangerous ones. Eberask thought to herself that if that day really came, she would not mind stepping in to repay the debt for Crash helping her reclaim her heart. Not long afterward, Crash returned to Green Pine Manor after a long absence. Seeing how drowsy Bianca looked, he let out a helpless sigh and simply bent down to scoop her up entirely into his arms. Bianca offered no resistance at all and naturally leaned into his chest. This time, all for the sake of obtaining a single stalk of golden dragon grass. One trouble after another had happened along the way, but at least he had returned safely. On the way back to his room, Crash signaled for Arioto to clearly explain everything that had happened at Green Pine Manor during this time. Arioto hurried to keep up and spoke first of the first matter. Upon hearing what had happened while Crash was at the Hardenhearts family, the main house had already sent people to look for him. They had been able to put it off before, but this time they probably could not. It was said that the main house had discovered a reporting omission when young Master Crash and Miss Bianca had left together, and those responsible for reporting had even prepared matters so that Green Pine Manor would have no room to argue. So the main house thoroughly investigated everyone who had previously looked down on the young master or handled their duties carelessly and directly dismissed them. No one knew exactly how the process had been carried out, but it had been frighteningly efficient. Clearly, Arioto had managed it all on his own. Crash silently praised him. Arioto truly was steady in handling affairs. Then Arioto changed the subject. There is one more matter. Regarding the dog's lair incident that young master dealt with earlier, the main house is now discussing it further internally. Crash was not surprised at all. Recent events had already made many people begin to question the label of Valheim's useless one, and the dog's lair incident was the final hammer strike. Valheim's look-down-on boy had indeed risen. Then he heard another piece of news. Before long, the chief head butler of the main house would personally come to Green Pine Manor. That person held the highest status among all Valheim direct line attendants and was also the only one qualified to score the direct descendants. She would conduct a comprehensive evaluation of the direct descendants and then report the scores directly to the family head. This evaluation would determine future treatment and even affect one's standing within the family. And in past evaluations, Crash had always ranked at the bottom, which was why Green Pine Manor had always been looked down upon. Crash had originally only wanted to leave behind the faintest possible trace in Valheim, but after the dog's lair incident, the family's attention had become unavoidable. Thinking it over, that was fine too. It would be a good opportunity to make use of the family's resources. Most importantly, if he wanted to meet the person who possessed the Moonshade Limb, he had to borrow Valheim's power, so being valued was actually a good thing. Also, Mr. Damferlion sent word. Once young master returns, send over the materials that have been gathered. Crash understood immediately. The preparations on that side were nearly complete. He nodded to Arioto and said, "You've worked hard during this time." But Arioto showed no joy. Instead, he suddenly stopped halfway through his words. "One final matter. Miss Charlotte is staying at Green Pine Manor right now." As the words fell, a figure slowly approached. She had inherited the same sharp eyes as Crash, and also the distinctive beauty of the Arya family. She was Crash's elder sister, fourth generation of the Valheim family, publicly acknowledged as the young sword saint, Charlotte Valheim. She gave Crash a casual glance. That trademark fake smile of hers sent a chill down the spine. The corners of her mouth rose, yet her tone was full of ridicule, if that could be called a smile at all. Crash had thought Charlotte was still out on an erosion expedition, and had not expected her to return this quickly. What shocked Crash even more was that Charlotte had already crossed the barrier into the master rank. She was only 15 years old, even among the genius-crowded Valheim family. That was a miracle so rare it was almost absurd. But Crash had never regarded her as a monster only because of her realm. The truly outrageous part was this: Charlotte had never formed a contract with any god, and even in his previous life she had remained that way to the end. She was the person in the world who had received the most invitations from gods, yet she had rejected every single one and climbed to the summit of the sword domain by relying on nothing but her own blade. At this moment, Charlotte stepped forward. "The rumors about you lately are pretty interesting." As she spoke, she raised a hand as if to pinch Bianca's cheek. "I heard you became a heroic knight just to go looking for your fiancé?" Crash immediately blocked her hand and would not let her touch Bianca. Charlotte stared at Crash's protective reaction for several seconds before slowly withdrawing her hand. She told Crash not to be so tense. She was not going to steal his precious fiancé. It was just that she felt strange right now. Her own younger brother was actually looking at her with this kind of gaze. Crash answered back directly. When someone swaggered into another person's house, he really could not manage a friendly look. Charlotte replied as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Every place carrying the name Valheim was her home, so if she returned to her own home, was she supposed to be coldly received? At that instant, Crash subconsciously took one step backward. Charlotte's aura had already condensed into real pressure. For some reason, she seemed angry. From the very first moment Crash had seen her, she had been like this. In the end, Crash asked directly, "Are you angry?" Charlotte replied just as directly, "Yes, I'm angry. I thought we were the closest, yet I knew nothing at all. Did you sign a contract with a god? And you've even reached mid-expert rank?" Crash's expression darkened slightly, and he bit his lip. He could roughly guess what Charlotte had awakened. Star eyes, those eyes that could see through all things, even world erosion itself. But just as the Crimson Court had said, even she might not be able to determine for certain whether what she was seeing was truly the aura of erosion. So through talent alone, Charlotte had touched a realm that ordinary people could never reach in a lifetime. But Crash knew even more clearly. She had most likely mistaken the erosion aura in him for some troublesome curse. No wonder Dogslayer had been defeated by her in the previous life. Once Star Eyes opened, illusions like his became meaningless, and Crash had the power of erosion hidden in his body. There was no way such a forbidden thing could receive a favorable judgment. If things went badly, Charlotte might treat him as a hidden threat and draw her sword to remove him outright. Fortunately, Charlotte did not continue pressing the issue in the end. Before leaving, she only dropped one sentence that made Crash's scalp go numb. "Go back to your room, put your things down, and then come to the training grounds immediately. I want to see with my own eyes exactly how much ability my little brother has." A short while later, in the middle of the training grounds, Charlotte stood holding a wooden sword, and just standing there alone made it hard for others to breathe. In the next second, she raised her eyes, and those same brilliant blue eyes as Crash's burst with sharp light. "I really do have to look at you differently. I thought you'd be so scared you'd run away, but if you disappoint me, I really will beat you hard." As the words fell, she slowly raised her wooden sword. "So in this duel, bring out all your strength." Crash understood immediately. She was serious. If he held back even a little, Charlotte would beat him flat without mercy. Thinking of that, he gripped his longsword tightly and took up a battle stance. In the next moment, Charlotte's figure suddenly blurred. It looked like she had only lightly tapped the ground, yet her body had already become an afterimage. Immediately after, her wooden sword shot straight toward Crash's throat. But Crash had been waiting for exactly this moment. He had been suppressing Sword Demon's draw/slash the entire time, all to force Charlotte to make the first move. On the spot, he activated Extinguishing Flame Erosion, and his vision instantly accelerated to the limit while his sixth sense precisely locked onto the incoming trajectory of the wooden sword. At the same time, the aura inside the scabbard surged wildly like a storm, and the black flames of Extinguishing Flame Erosion quietly seeped into it as well. In the next second, black flames explosively spread within the sheath, and a terrifying burst of force instantly tore apart the body's limits. Accompanied by the crackling sound of erosion power burning briefly, Crash's longsword burst from the sheath, and the two powers collided head-on, instantly whipping up a storm of flames that swept across the entire field. After all, this was the ultimate draw technique formed by fusing the aura storm with Extinguishing Flame Erosion. If Charlotte had covered the wooden sword with all her aura from the very beginning, she might still have been able to block it. But in her eyes, this had only been a test, and she had never intended to be serious from the start. So the wooden sword was not fully protected by aura and was instantly torn apart by Crash's attack. For the first time, a subtle tremor appeared in Charlotte's eyes. At the same time, the look in her eyes changed completely, from careless indifference to undisguised excitement. A pure blade of aura suddenly rose in her palm, a power that only those at the master rank could condense. Charlotte's aura field instantly filled the surrounding space, and with just one clash, the longsword in Crash's hand was shaken loose and sent helplessly flying into the air. If Charlotte had decided from the beginning to end the battle with the first strike, the gap between them would have been absolute domination, simply not on the same level, impossible to make up by any means. At the very instant Charlotte knocked the longsword away, Crash's arm suddenly shot out, and the longsword that had been sent flying actually reappeared in his palm and returned to his hand. Charlotte's eyes flew wide open. She had not expected that the younger brother, once publicly acknowledged as worthless, had already reached the point of making her feel strained.